Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
You're expected to have it all figured out by the time you turn 18. That's why society makes such a big deal about that age. But I had it all worked out by the time I was 14. By then, I already knew exactly who I was and who I would always be. Now I'm 29, making good money as an advertising copywriter. At 29, you can hide behind the security of your paycheck, using it to craft whatever image you want. But at 14, there's no hiding. At 14, you're whatever other people decide you are, and they'll remind you of it relentlessly until the message sticks. High school, that zoo of judgment, keeps its label short and straightforward. My label was geek. Others were jock, nerd, freak, babe, or bitch. Rarely did a label stretch beyond 4 or 5 letters. That suited the labellers just fine. They never cared enough to look beyond the short and simple. The labellers were usually the ones excelling in sports and the blonde long-legged pom-pom wielders. Before I turned 13, I had innocently tried to take part in their outdoor activities. But by the time I turned 14, the futility of that ambition had been rubbed in with wonderful efficiency. The jocks made it clear on day one. Geeks don't do sports. They are not only bad at it, but they deserve to be ridiculed and bullied into understanding it too. At 14, I understood. By 15, I knew that I'd better read books and talk about them with geeks who read books too. I also knew at what table to sit for lunch and at what tables not. But most of all, I knew this. Beautiful girls were not for the likes of me. You did not date them. You just ended up with a red face and a sinking heart. When I reached the age of 16, I found out that dating plain girls was not only easier, it also made me feel a lot more comfortable. Anyway, the brain is a beautiful thing. While kissing and necking a braced and bespectacled plain Jane, it conjured up images of every fabulous thing I ever saw. Or more realistic, I ever almost saw. I first got laid on prom night. Marie had a great body, actually, but her face was ground zero after 5 years of relentless acne. She was intelligent, witty, and fun. But who needs those on the back seat of an old car after gallons of illegal beer and the sweaty dancing of a prom's night? Well, you get the picture. I went to college, and the only difference there was the larger number of geeks and nerds. It gave me just more plain girls to choose from, and I did. After a few months of shyness and hesitance. About that time, another law kicked in. Plain girls are more eager. They are also more loyal. Of course, they have to, as they have to do battle for each conquest. It teaches them to hold on to what they have. Same thing goes for plain guys like me, of course. But I was a slow learner. I kept trying to hop around, until I at last had to admit that it was no use to turn in one ugly girl for another. That's when I met Irene and went as steady goes. I know. I sound terrible. As if the beauty of a girl is the only quality to look for. But I am honest too, at least here. At that time, it was indeed the only criterion. And the law came down as hard on the girls as on the likes of me. You see, when you raise kids and tell them they can't have candy, candy will be the one thing they crave for all the time. When they play at other children's homes, they beg for them all the time. Same with me. I was a healthy boy with a healthy appetite. My hormones were tickled by high, generous lips and endless legs. And they were denied me. Let's say it made me dream of candy 24/7. Irene was a miracle. Under her straight, mousy hair dwelt a mind of mercury. I never again met a girl who could turn a gray, rainy afternoon into paradise, just with words and images, with little touches and butterfly kisses. And when she smiled, her plain, stub-nosed face seemed to catch a ray of sunlight. Of course, that is how I remember her now. Back then, being the one-tracked oaf I was, I just took it all for granted. As a matter of fact, I felt sorry for myself, punished to always be with girls like her. It is actually how I thought about her. Girls like her, a species, a faceless part of a faceless multitude. God, was I pathetic back then? Nowadays, I am so much more with it. Being a well-to-do single urban professional. I go to the gym. I have lasered eyes and a suntan. My apartment is in magazines. I wear Boss, Armani, designer jeans. I frequent 3-star restaurants, rock concerts, operas. I travel abroad, meet the rich and famous, okay, let's say the well-to-do and the local snobs. Isn't it lovely, my life? Yeah, exactly. Who am I fooling? Truth is that I do have all that. But one icy glance of a gorgeous beauty, and all of it slides off me like flesh off a skeleton in a horror movie. It leaves me as naked and ugly as 15 years back, fumbling, stuttering. Believe me, men like me don't blush adoringly. They sweat. Last year I met Marie at the school reunion. She had found a famous cosmetic surgeon who had turned her into Angelina Jolie. Then she had met a local zillionaire and wore the ring to prove it. I know. I should never have gone to that reunion. Yesterday, I saw Irene in a glossy magazine. She just had her first novel published. It went to the top of the seller list in a week. Next to her in the picture was her tall, dark, handsome husband. She smiled like sunshine. She made me sweat. Curse too. Then again, maybe I could use her name in conversation. Tell someone she had been my girlfriend, once. Wouldn't that make me look like somebody? I saw the magazine at the reading table in the agency, sipping a cup of latte. That's when I heard a laugh. People used to call laughter like that silvery. I won't disagree most of the time, but this silver had life in it, a pulse, a breath. And it belonged to the most stunning girl I ever saw. First thing was her smile. Hard to miss, as it shone like a 100-watt lamp in her dark face. Her complexion was chocolate, her skin perfect. My routine is face curve body eyes, taking 2 seconds to complete the round. All 3 stages were spectacular. She was gorgeous looking. Her eyes, well, I have ever since wondered how to describe her eyes, but I can't tell you. They touched me where I live. A profoundly unnerving experience. Her name was Claire, and she preferred her coffee weak and sweet. I did not find that out, of course. I was as usual still getting the knot out of my tongue when good slick old Arnie had already poured the coffee for her, complimented her on her name, asked her if she was waiting for the Fredericks of Hollywood casting session that afternoon, and had taken her on a tour of the premises. To be sure, Claire had walked in for an interview at the accountant's company that occupied a few floors beneath us. She had gotten out of the elevator on the wrong floor. 3 days later, I met her in the reception lobby. As we rode to our separate floors, I at last succeeded in asking her a question. She told me she had gotten the job of secretary to one of the mini bean counters. Somehow I kept bumping into Claire quite a lot in the next weeks, and I discovered that she was something I had never seen in a girl as beautiful as her. Claire was shy. She fumbled with her fingers, never raised her voice, and often looked down. Her complexion was too dark to see if she blushed, but I am certain she often did. Another remarkable thing was the formal and conservative way she dressed. She often wore Chanel-type suits that should have been on elderly Washington politicians' wives and wealthy grannies. Her skirts hardly ever left her knees free. Her blouses were wide and buttoned up. Her heels seemed either flat or less than an inch in height. And still she looked dazzling. It took me 2 weeks to ask her out for lunch. She declined. I felt the familiar tons of geek shit descend on me. She was very sweet about it, whispered her apologies, but she really had to refuse. It took me 2 weeks to ask her again. 2 weeks in hell. They taught me I would die if I did not ask her again, but also that I might really die if she refused once more. Yes, I had fallen in love with Claire. And no, she did not turn me down the next time. We saw a movie, well, I guess she saw more of it than I did. Then we had a few drinks and some supper. It all seemed wrapped up in a pink haze. But when I conjured up all my courage to kiss her, she offered me her perfect cheek. No need to bore you with the tediousness of our courtship. We dated quite a bit in the next weeks, but each date ended right at the doorstep of her humble apartment. Of course I tried to lure her to mine, but she never even seemed to acknowledge my suggestions. Then I made a huge mistake. One day we had a short and pleasant little lunch in the mall. On the way back, I tried to get her attention focused on a rather sexy outfit in one of the windows. It was a short, deeply red velvet dress with spaghetti-type straps. I suggested for her to try it on, and I was for the first time introduced to an expression I would see more of in the months to come. Deep hurt, mixed with disappointment. She left me standing right there, and it would take me weeks to have her answer my phone calls again. Why did I keep courting Claire? She was like a Fata Morgana, those appearing and disappearing little oases in the shimmering desert. And yes, that cartoon-like man crawling in the hot sands was me. Or maybe she was more like a slippery fish in a pond, always escaping the cage of my hands. She drove me mad. Then, one day, she pushed me over the edge. We had a company party, a small celebration at the offices. So I asked Claire to meet me there and attended as my date. She agreed, and for days, I nursed these exciting thoughts about stunning my colleagues with my eye candy. She didn't show up. I phoned her all evening and the next day, but she never answered. Nor did I see her in the building. That was when I decided to forget about her, or at least give her the impression I did, because I never could get her out of my mind for more than 10 seconds. It took her a week to call me. Her voice on the phone was thick with emotions. She told me she had panicked at the thought of going to the party. She could see why I hated her, but she had been too scared. She was so very sorry. She sobbed. She understood if I didn't want to see her anymore, but she had been so scared. In short, after she had sobbed and sorried for 10 minutes, you could wipe me up from the floor. Claire and I married half a year later. It was a very small ceremony as I was an only child with one surviving parent, my mother, and an aunt. Claire had a brother and a few cousins in Louisiana who did not bother to fly up. There were friends and colleagues. We took a honeymoon on the Bahamas. In the weeks after the time, she stood me up at the party. She changed a lot. I admired her for her courage, as it must have been hard for her to open up, to break through her shyness and accompany me to parties, wearing nice and sexy dresses. She had to make small talk with people she did not know. And, yes, she even came with me to my apartment afterwards. The first time I hardly dared ask. We had been to a company function, where she had easily been the evening's main attraction. By then the amazement of me having a girl like her on the arm had died down a bit, but her attraction to the male population at the party had only increased. The panting sex hounds didn't even bother if I was around to let their tongues hang down her body. It only made my ego swell with a feeling I had never ever had. The feeling of alpha male pride, I guess. And it went straight to my crotch. So, when she pushed me inside my apartment the moment I had opened my front door, I was as ready as the next hormone-ridden teenager. Too ready, maybe. Love me tonight, Leon. Before I change my mind, she whispered into my ear. I did just that. In the weeks after this first time, we had sex almost every night, twice in weekends. Claire had not been a virgin. She told me she had had a few young lovers in high school and college, but they had been as clumsy and new at it as she was. She learned amazingly fast. The intimacy of it all plunged us into the dream world where new lovers live, forgetting the world around us. We went everywhere together, feeling proud and self-assured. In bed we did everything by now. She also became more expressive, using words she may not even have known before. I never wondered where the shy Claire went. You know me by now. Because I was so very proud of myself, I took all the credit. All her changes should be written on my account. Me Tarzan, you Claire. It was 6 months after our honeymoon when fate knocked on my office door. We were working hard on a new campaign for one of our biggest accounts. We put in long hours, and in these last weeks, I had been traveling a lot. I tried to be with Claire as often as I could, but too often I could not. She never complained and was always as sweet as candy when I came home. I usually was all over her as soon as I was 3 steps inside the door. That morning, I drank coffee, reading a report we might need for the campaign. There was some scratching at the glass door to my office. I looked up and saw Everett M. What's his name from the mailroom? Everett is just out of his teens. We don't employ many, maybe 8 or 9. So few even that it might get the company in trouble. Advertising is still quite a white stronghold. Hi, Everett. What can I do for you? I smiled at him, clueless why he might want to see me. Sit down and spill it. I can see there is something on your mind. I love to sound magnanimous, although it might only sound like that to me. It sure did nothing to make Everett less nervous. He sat down in front of me. Why does she only screw tall guys? He asked. I just stared. Aren't we good enough for her? He continued and stared down on his fingers. My mind raced. What or who on earth could he mean, and why ask me? Everett, I tried. I'm not sure I know what you mean. Everett looked up. His eyes were sad. Why does she screw the tall guys in here, and not me or Darius or Bryce? I had read some Kafka and felt myself slide into his crazy world. Who? Everett? I asked. Who are you talking about? He now looked puzzled. Your missus, of course, he blurted. Your wife. Is she too good for us? Or don't you allow her? She is herself short, for Christ's sake. An ice-cold rain soaked me. I tried to speak, but couldn't. I felt numb and removed from reality. I gasped. Then I rose to close the door. My knees hardly held me up. I returned to my chair, watching the guy's sullen face. Are you messing with me, Everett? I said. That is my goddamn wife you were talking about. He looked puzzled. Then his eyes widened, as if a sudden revelation came over him. Hell, he whispered. You don't know? What he told me then was so utterly weird and unbelievable that I twice felt the urge to punch him in the face to make him stop. I wanted to grab him and kick him out of the office, but I only sat and heard his words through a buzz in my skull. He tried to be cool about it. It almost sounded like a rap, but for me none of the words rhymed. He told me how he had picked up stories at the office. Stories about the stunning chick that spread her legs for everyone. Then, at the office party about a month ago, he had seen who she was. I remembered that party. I could not attend, being abroad. Claire had asked me what to do, and I told her she should go. No reason to stay home and be bored only because I was away. I remembered her sighing on the phone, and I gathered that her shyness made her feel reluctant to go. So, I told her just to have a look and stay as long as she had a good time. The next day she phoned me and said it had been okay. She has stayed an hour. Then she had taken a cab home. Everett had quite a different version of that party. Claire had been hit upon right from the moment she walked in, wearing an incredibly sexy dress. As he described it, I had no idea ever to have seen it before. Or since, for that matter. Claire had been offered a lot of drinks, and she seemed very much at ease, talking to some of the white guys from upstairs, which meant management and office talk. Everett said he had watched her closely as he had heard all the stories, and because he wouldn't often see a sexy chick like her close up. But after a while, he got distracted, and when he again looked for her, she had gone, only to return half an hour later. This seemed to have set a pattern. After her second disappearance, Everett got curious. He followed her the moment she left again in the company of Dan Johnston, the vice president of finances. They had gone to Dan's office and closed the door, so he could not see what they did. But sure enough, half an hour later they reappeared. The girl had gone straight to the ladies to restore her hair and makeup. The man had rejoined the party, and his wife, at once. After the party, the corridors had buzzed with excited gossip about Leon's wife having been screwed by management. And as the weeks went on, new stories were added, involving every white guy, single or married, who had any position of consequence in the company. When I had seemed oblivious of it all, they had supposed I knew. Maybe, they thought, I used Claire to get a promotion or something. Especially because, at the last function, 2 weeks ago, I had been there with Claire, and she had had herself screwed nevertheless. I gasped when Everett told me that. I remembered the reception. I also remembered that Claire had been very easy around my boss and the other guys from upstairs. They had chatted and flirted, and yes, I was quite proud of her. But I don't remember her slipping away. So, relieved that I at last found a flaw in his story, I told him that it all had to be rumors and bad-mouthing. He shrugged and stood. You believe what you want to believe, man, he said. But I saw her get screwed there with my own eyes. I also stood, feeling a sudden rage choke my throat. You saw? When? How? She never left and I was there. She went to the ladies 4 times that evening, Everett said, making a throwaway gesture with his hand. Only thing is she never went to the ladies. I stared at him. He looked back. Some sympathy crawled into his eyes. Sorry I had to tell you, man. I thought you knew. He turned and left me behind like an empty shell. That night, I did not know how to find the courage to go home. I left the office early, but only made it past the first bar to reach a second and a third. Together, they added up to a nice collection of deep and very empty glasses. At the third bar, it took me too long to understand that it was my cell phone ringing, but I got it the next time. It was Claire, and she sounded agitated. She asked where I was, and as I answered, my tongue got in the way. I looked up at the bartender, and he said Red Bull. I wondered what he meant. He took over the cell phone and gave directions. I slid off the stool. A cold splash of water caused Claire to swim into my field of blurred vision. I apologized, I guess. Next, I was in the back of a cab. Then I was riding an elevator. There were blanks, but in the end I lay stretched out on a couch that looked familiar. The lights went out once more. Mighty sledgehammers crashed into heavy metal drums, while little sweet curls of violin music meandered through them like poison ivy. Growling basses throbbed beneath it. Distant wisps of coffee aroma tried to reach my nose. I cranked my eyes open, expecting my head to float against the ceiling. I was as dead as a living man can be. Slender fingers pushed a mug into my hands, and the smell of coffee hit me hard. I sipped. It helped. It helped 0.001 points on a scale of 1,000, but it helped. It was a first little step on a journey across the world. But hey, you have to start somewhere. Claire smiled into my face. She sat on the other side of the kitchen table. I must somehow have found the energy to get up and sit there too. We were silent, drinking coffee, eating dry biscuits. My stomach heaved, but stayed put. What happened? She asked, her voice all mellow. Good question, I growled. The words sounded reassuringly like themselves. Something at work? She continued. Bad news? I stared at her. It all came back, like a screaming rat pack clawing its way through my guts. Bad news, yes, I said. Awfully bad. She looked worried. There are more jobs, honey, she said, putting her warm hand on mine. You are good, they all know. Not that, I answered. Then I could not go on. All the bitter words were there, but I could not get them out. The finality of it all stunned me into silence. It felt so incredibly surreal now. I shook my head as if to clear it from things that stuck to the inside of my skull. Later, I whispered. I stood and walked to the bathroom. The shower was heaven. Claire left for work. I called in sick. They didn't like it, in the middle of the campaign development, but I didn't give a shit. I just sat at the table, an empty cold mug turning in my hands. Then I rose carefully, not wanting to disturb the huge church bells in the dome of my skull. I cleaned up the kitchen and went for a run in a park near the apartment. The cool breeze helped, so did the exercise. My erratic thoughts did not help much, though. Not at all. Breakfast with Claire had subdued the urge to scream at her, attack her with questions, accuse her, hurt her. All that was left now was a numb feeling. A need to know, but also a fear to know. I'll ask her tonight, I concluded, and just thinking that took a huge weight off my shoulders. A weight that returned, of course, as the day progressed. When I was preparing dinner, my hands shook with fearful anticipation. The meal went all right, as far as Claire was concerned. She had walked in around 6 p.m., all fresh and bubbly. She kissed me for setting the table and making dinner. Then she took a shower and returned in a nice slinky dress to go with the table linens, candles, and napkins I had laid out. Me, I had to force each forkful down. She noticed, and I guess she supposed I wasn't all well yet. So I struggled through the courses and desserts until we arrived at coffee. That's when I could not keep the lid on it. Why? I blurted, and the word almost tore open the inside of my throat. Claire started at the sudden outburst. What do you mean, honey? She stammered, clutching the edge of the table with both hands. I gasped, already ashamed of the outburst. Honey, I tried again, almost whispering now. They tell awful things about you at the office. Claire's eyes widened. She looked surprised, not shocked but confused about what I might mean. Awful things? She repeated. What awful things? At my office or yours? I don't know. I closed my eyes, then opened them again. They say you screwed half the management at the last few parties of my company. When the last word slipped out, I already wanted to grab it and put the whole sentence back where it came from. But it was too late. Claire looked truly shocked. The hurt invaded her gaze, an expression I knew so well. It was the way she looked whenever I trampled on her feelings. And at once I felt a total heel. It hadn't been true. Of course it hadn't. How could it? Stupid fool. They say that of me? Claire said with a trembling voice. Her body leant back in her chair, as far away from me as possible. I only stared at her. And, she continued, now with a hint of frost in her voice. And you believe that? I sat there and knew I blew it. I only had this one story of a spiteful teenager. Goddamn it, maybe the boy just wanted to get back at white scum like me. Maybe he and his buddies had a grudge against Claire for fraternizing with the white bosses from upstairs. What had I been thinking? Look at her, man. Look at what you did to her. You goddamn oaf. Believing hearsay at a glance and accusing the only person in the whole world who had taken the immense trouble of falling in love with me. Bravo. Claire rose. She threw her napkin on the table and walked out of the room. I shook the daze off me and cried after her. She didn't respond and disappeared in our bedroom. As I reached the door, I heard the lock click. It was the most sickening sound I ever heard. I begged at the door. I knocked and whined. She didn't answer. I even called her cell phone and heard it ring in the kitchen. That night I spent on the couch staring into the darkness until it turned gray again with the light of dawn. I crawled out of the nest I had made and once more knocked on the bedroom door. It opened at once and I started to blurt out apologies. But they stuck in my throat when I saw the suitcases in her hands and the coat on her arm. Claire, don't, I cried, trying to block her way. She just evaded me and walked to the kitchen where she picked up her purse with keys and cell phone. Then she went to the front door, never even looking at me. I scrambled behind her, begging her to not do this, to stay, to forgive me, to talk to me. The sound of the door closing put an end to that. I sank to the floor and cried. The next day was as hollow as the one before. The night in between gave me maybe 1 hour of exhausted sleep. I avoided the mirror, the shaving gear, and the toothbrush. And I again called in sick. I also called Claire, about 1,000 times. She never answered. Around 4 in the afternoon the doorbell rang. I ran to it, almost stumbling over my feet. It wasn't her. It was a well-groomed gentleman in a dark blue suit. He asked me if the name he mentioned was mine, and I agreed. He handed me a big envelope and informed me that I had been served with divorce papers. He smiled. Then he left me standing in my robe and stubbles, staring at the large yellow envelope. She wanted nothing out of the divorce. She just wanted out. When I at last saw her at the attorney's office where we had to sign the papers, she hid behind her lawyer and never responded to my urgent pleas to talk. She just signed and left. I had no options left but to follow her example. I quit my job and not even care to find a new one. I just hung around in my apartment, watching TV and playing stupid video games. I felt very sorry for myself. One day, not a month after the divorce, I picked up my mail, sorting through it. There was an expensive, cream envelope. The handwriting stopped me, making my heart race. Inside was a formally printed card. It invited me to attend the marriage of Ms. Claire Gabrielle Beaulieu and Mr. Michael James Carter. The envelope also contained a slip of paper with a single line on it, written in the same hand as the cover. It said, "Honey, I always screw up, never down." Carter was my ex-boss, and by now Mrs. Carter's ex-husband. I never liked him much, but right now, I felt pity. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
I'm 47, and my wife is 45. We've been married for 22 years, and we have 3 kids, a 20-year-old son, and 2 daughters, 18 and 16. On September 11, 2001, my wife planned to meet a man she met online at a nearby hotel. They had been texting and exchanging pictures for months. At that time, we had been married for 2 years, and our son was not even a year old. Surprisingly, the only thing that stopped her was the Trade Center's attack. Her uncle was on the 84th floor of the South Tower, and it was almost certain he died on impact. The entire country was mourning, and she took it hard. I sympathized with her and was there to console her. After some crying, she confessed her plan, expressed regret, and showed me proof that they hadn't gone beyond emotional conversations. Before the confession, I had a gut feeling something was wrong, but I never thought she would have an emotional affair. This shocked me because I thought she wasn't that type of person, having grown up in a sheltered environment. She confessed that she regretted her actions and changed her mind. She apologized and showed me proof that things hadn't progressed beyond an emotional connection. Before the confession, I suspected something, but I had no idea it was an emotional affair. It was shocking because I believed she wasn't that kind of person. She grew up in a sheltered environment, not allowed to party, drink, or go on dates, and she felt like she missed out. When we started our relationship, she told me I was her first, and I believed her. However, after her confession on September 9th, I wasn't so sure. If she would go this far, what else was she hiding? If not for Osama bin Laden, she might have gone through with it, and I would never have known. The fact that she came clean without me finding out contributed to my willingness to reconcile, with the condition of her getting counseling. Additionally, I saw no proof of a physical affair. I remembered how the entire experience crushed me. Despite canceling the plan, she was remorseful and did the right things. It took a long time, but eventually, the pain faded into a memory. Trust, however, is like a clean sheet of paper. When damaged, it becomes deformed with infidelity, like crumpling it into a ball. You can smooth it out, but it will never be as pure as new. Trust became a personal issue for me. Even as I got comfortable with the reconciliation, I still had to check on my own just to be sure. She passed those checks, smoothing things out somewhat, but it was never perfect again. Then, 19 years later, on October 14th, 2019, with 2 more beautiful children, I had a gut feeling. I hate having gut feelings. One Monday morning, she had an argument with our 18-year-old daughter. Later that day, I made my daughter laugh, but my wife, still upset, left the house. She turned off her location sharing, raising my suspicions. The trust that had never fully restored needed reassurance, so I kept trying to check her phone, computer, and anything else that might be helpful. The next day, we had to get a passport for our youngest at the post office. She was aloof, constantly on her phone, and I made a mental note to check it out later. Usually she left her phone around, but lately, she carried it everywhere, another unsettling feeling. We bought her an iPad, and she locked it with a passcode, which surprised me. We don't usually use passcodes, and although she explained it was for work, doubts remained. On Friday, we closed on a home equity loan at the bank, and she said she had to run an errand. Checking her check-ins, I found out one stop was at an adult store. I looked for items when I had the chance and found a nice piece of lingerie. Our bed life had been stagnant due to her lack of interest, prompting her to look for information on female desire issues. Curiosity led me to monitor what I could. Finally, I got the passcode to her iPad and discovered explicit Facebook messages with a guy. Even though they weren't friends on Facebook, she responded as if she knew him. The conversation turned explicit, and when he suggested she drop her daughter off and come over, she declined, saying, My stories aren't set up like that. Instead of holding on to this information and its source to get a clearer picture, I ended up confronting her that evening, which was a big mistake. It was too soon because she lied and took the affair underground. She said the lingerie was for us, claiming she was building up the courage to wear it for me. She also said the guy on Facebook was a summer co-worker who started messaging her out of the blue. She swore there was no physical contact, just texting. I want to believe that, but it's hard for me. I insisted it had to end completely, and she agreed immediately. The next day I asked if it ended, and she said yes. Unbeknownst to her, I could see their messages through other means. She lied, and now, after 19 years, it's happening again. My emotions are a mess. I can't eat or sleep and have a hard time concentrating. I'm starting counseling this week and hitting the gym more. This situation sucks, and I don't want to go through it. I've been reading the 180 almost daily since D-Day. I pulled it off well for a couple of days, but today was rough. I got almost no sleep last night. Our son, who works at a local theater, gave us tickets to come from away. We had to pretend everything was great to not disappoint him. At 20, he's a great kid. If you're not familiar with the show, it deals with the trading center story, and it was tough. I've kept a journal, observing dates, times, and my thoughts. I've come up with a mantra. Keep cool, keep patient, keep control. I need to be more consistent, but it's something I've been trying to get to. I've gotten into a better headspace. Now we have to go shopping tonight, and I want to practice the 180 as best as I can. Fast forward to July 3rd, 2021. My investigation revealed her contact with other men through the summer school program where she works as a teacher's aide. He's the gym teacher. Affair partner is 32 years old. The wayward wife is 47, making her a cougar, I guess. The fair partner is a gym teacher at a nearby school, and his wife works at a different school, not even in the same district. The wayward wife met him while they were working at summer school. Summer school here is run in a few districts, so teachers from different districts work together. I found out he would be there again, observed quietly, and caught a suggestive Facebook message. He rejected her, which made me chuckle. I've actually come to believe he sees her as a friend and doesn't want to get involved. She's 47, about 15 years older than him. I'm not completely done yet, but I can see it from here. Given the magnitude of the life change, I need to know. I am setting up my intel network, voice-activated recorder, GPS, electronic passcode, and so on. I want as close to incontrovertible proof as I can have before I pull the trigger. I've also been reading up on and taking notes on divorce laws in my state. I will be contacting lawyers as well. I have a few friends who have been recently divorced, and I will be hitting them up for any advice too. Then, I conspicuously collected some DNA samples from my 3 children to make sure that they are mine, just for peace of mind. By far, the hardest thing that I've ever done. Regardless of the results, I will love them unconditionally. As for what I'm waiting for, well, I go from thinking we're done to maybe often enough that I know I have to have it break me in the face hard enough, and it hasn't yet. I also feel like I don't want to put my kids through it, even though they are older, unless it's pretty cut and dry. This is a part of me that ghoulishly enjoys hearing her on the voice-activated recorder complain about the latest development. He unfriended a lot of people in the last days or two. Yes, I snooped there too, and she's not too happy about it. And I know this isn't going to go over well, but she's been going through what I call a midlife crisis over the last year or so. She also lost her mom back in November, and we are having the funeral tomorrow. She's also taking it very hard. 2 days after her mom passed, we lost my dad. Over the next 3 weeks, she lost 2 more relatives. Then it was Christmas. My family has faced a lot of tragedy recently, and I see it's deeply affecting her. In the back of my mind, I thought maybe this is a result of those events. Perhaps I should create more space between our losses and the potential pain of divorce. I'm willing to endure it a bit longer for my kids and family. Holding out before making that decision is tough. After 26 years together, giving up isn't easy, especially considering the depth of love I've felt for her throughout most of our marriage. I can't argue with that. My plan is to spend this week checking out divorce attorneys. We have a birthday party for my daughter next Sunday, and after that, I plan to confront her. I don't know exactly what I'll say, but I'll let her know I've consulted an attorney and I'm ready to press the divorce button. While I'd love for her to have a realization moment, I won't continue the marriage after collecting evidence of her affair. On February 11th, 2022, I installed a voice-activated recorder in her car. Listening to the recording made me note the effects I'd feel and how to deal with them. Sleeplessness, use PM and melatonin, nervous energy, hit the gym, lack of appetite, knock off those extra pounds, difficulty concentrating, write everything down and recite common tasks. I forgot about night sweats until they happened, then prepared with towels and fresh clothes. Relief followed, knowing no more spying or walking on eggshells. Before I actually told her, I knew she was treating me like things were wonderful in our lives for the last few months. She was upset over receiving a box of her late mother's things from her dad to sort out. It didn't affect me. I felt no sympathy, grief, or sorrow at seeing her upset. When the confrontation finally occurred, after her prodding and pushing, "What's wrong? Tell me what's bothering you." All I did was say his name and the words, "I know." She got flustered and stormed out of the house. I don't have to worry about her anymore. I don't have to feel on edge when she's around, as if I had to act a certain way or make sure I accomplish certain tasks. As for the recent developments with her, something seemed off. We were getting along a little too well. She was almost too nice to me. Things that would normally annoy her suddenly didn't. At first I thought she was finally happy, but eventually it nagged at me, and I decided to become the marriage police. I installed a voice-activated recorder on her car and got the GPS in there. Again. I went fishing and I caught something on my first cast. The recording contained 2 phone calls. The first was of him as she was driving out to meet him. They ended up in a church parking lot, really for about 40 minutes. She went to his car, so I was spared having to listen to that. The next call was to her sounding board friend who lives halfway across the country. If the call to him wasn't enough, and I have no doubt I could have found wiggle room in that if I really wanted to keep my blinders on, then the call to her sealed the deal. The conversation that eventually happened between us was a familiar story here, primarily gaslighting and blame shifting. Apparently, her affair was my fault because she resents things she never got to do in her life. She didn't go to college or have a wild single life before we got married, and of course it's my fault and she resented me for it. I told her I refused to accept her idea that her affair was my fault, and I had told her a while ago that if she wanted out, then let's end it, and she chose to stay. So no, this is all about her. I will accept some responsibility for not being the perfect husband, but I certainly wasn't married to the perfect wife. I certainly didn't deserve this. So I'm calling a few divorce friends for attorney recommendations and any strategic advice that they might have. I am finally ready to end it. I have finally learned my lesson. My wayward wife has shown she doesn't deserve what it takes to reconcile, and I don't want to sign up for another affair in a few months or years, so I'm joining the divorce side. Is there any secret handshake or something I should learn? I am still in the whirlwind of emotion. I break a wall, but luckily, neither the wall nor I got hurt. I yelled, "Forget her!" loudly in my house. Thankfully, no one else was home, so when my best friend called to check on me, I broke down sobbing. I daydream about a magical reconciliation for her. Would it be so bad if we stayed together? Maybe if I tried a little harder, she'd be happy. But my head knows this is nonsense, and getting a divorce is the right move. I've said it to my mom, my friends, and myself many times in the last couple of days since D-Day. We've mostly avoided each other, and I really miss her. We used to text during the day, share our work experiences, and have random hugs and kisses at home. All of that has stopped, and, as I mentioned, we stay away from each other in the house. Now, she sleeps on the couch instead of the bed. One of my simple pleasures in the morning was gently waking her up when our alarm went off by rolling over, rubbing her back or arm and whispering, "Hey honey, it's that time," which was always followed by an almost inaudible response that always brought a smile to my face. She hasn't left yet. We haven't split yet, but I know what I have to do. I just know it won't be easy. Can you please tell me there is light at the end of this long, dark, lonely tunnel? Our children had the opportunity to travel and do some pretty cool things with their involvement in this cool musical group. She's jealous and has expressed it because she never got to do any of that. Newsflash, neither did I. I'm not jealous, but I'm happy that my kids have more than I did. I've spent the last 20 years in a fairly popular local band, playing at some pretty nice events. She's jealous of those opportunities, though. She dismisses the hours of practice and study it took to get in a place to be able to do this thing. Although I can tell you how many times she shared stories with me of people she met at work who heard us or followed us. It's like she feels like a big deal because she's married to one of the members. She even had to talk to someone in the doctor's office after overhearing them talking about the gig we were doing that night. She complained that I left her alone with the kids when I went out to play. Well, I was working and I came home with money in my pocket. I did have fun. Yes, playing music in front of people is exhilarating. Shifting gears, dealing with bar owners, staying on top of timing and crowd reaction. At work, though, getting up at 5 a.m., working a full day, then gigging and not getting home until 2 a.m. made for a long day. Also not fun, but we needed the money because of the house she wanted to build. Leaving the group was simply not an option. She worked too, but I earned almost as much just gigging as she did at her regular job, which also made her upset, and my real job paid 3 to 4 times hers. So I worked hard to give my family the life I thought they deserved, and what I got was resentment. The old saying that when someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time is indeed true. It took me too long to see who I married. I came to the same conclusion. If we stay together, I am signing up for not being around. I've gotten a couple of attorney references and will be setting up appointments soon. I just don't see a path that doesn't end in divorce. There's really nothing left to work with. The funny thing is, people who know her outside of the home think she's a wonderful person, warm, caring, and a terrific mom. Someone who goes above and beyond to help others. And she does all that. But inside the house, it's a different story. She's definitely suffered from what I call the poor me syndrome. He's a coworker married to another coworker. I haven't told her family. All she has left is her dad and his sister. I don't really talk to them much, but I might tell him at least at some point. I've reached out to the other betrayed spouse, but she hasn't responded. I'll send another email in a couple of days with details and then leave her alone if I don't hear anything back. So tonight, I told her I want a divorce. She wanted a hug and to cry, but those times are over. She understood. We talked wistfully about how we wish things were different. I asked her, "Didn't you realize that this was going to happen when you were doing it?" She did, but she's still very upset. I feel bad. I still love this woman, but I can't be with her anymore. I don't want to do this, but I have to. A few years down the road, I'll feel better knowing I'm free. The band is on hiatus at the moment, but I have a few irons in the fire to keep me playing. We play classic rock with horns, Chicago, etc. I play trumpet. I have my sights set on that day. I know I'm starting down a rough road, but I'm confident I'll come out in good shape. She left a door open for counseling, but I shut it down, although I urged her to get counseling anyway. The only thing I can blame myself for right now is not ending things earlier. I've done nothing else wrong in the last few years. On the contrary, I've tried to be the model husband and make her the most important thing in my life. And yet, here I am again. I keep wanting to keep my marriage, but then I remember why I can't. It's a sad thing, really, and as much as anything else, it shows me that I'm ready to let go. I reached out to the other betrayed spouse via email, but got no response. So at the advice from a different thread, I called her and broke it to her. I've never felt like such a mess in my life. I know I didn't do anything but tell her what she needed to know, yet she was heartbroken, and I felt responsible. It was like finding out all over again. I broke the poor woman's heart. I know I didn't, but she thanked me. That wasn't easy to do. We talked more, and I'll guide her to this site for support. It helped me greatly. I also told her that even though we've never met, I'll be there for her. She can call or text me anytime. She was helpful to me, comparing notes and making sense of the situation. Just got off the phone with her. I feel much better about telling her now. She thanked me, and I feel I did the right thing, even though it was hard. We chatted more, and I'll direct her to this site for support. It's been a great help for me. I assured her I'm here for her, even though we haven't met. She can call or text me anytime. She was helpful to me too, comparing notes and making sense of the situation. Just finished a phone call with her, and I feel better about opening up. She thanked me, and I believe I did the right thing. It was tough, but I wanted to hear about his behavior. He seemed to create a story of an unhappy marriage to gain sympathy. I'm not ignoring her role, but she might have been manipulated with things she wanted to hear. My wife is unaware I exposed the affair partner, affecting 2 families and 6 children. Looking at a parent and wondering how they could do that is tough. Just have her compare paychecks. That's what's been happening. I only talk to her about kids or household matters. I mostly avoid being in the same room as her. The house is cold, and she's slowly realizing she's gone too far. I'm calling lawyers, gathering friends for support, and making plans to leave. I don't think she's quite out of her daze yet. I'm distancing myself as much as I can. We only talk if she initiates, and it's about the house, kids, or money. Trust me, she's starting to get it. She might expect me to act like nothing happened or to do the pick-me dance. In the past, that's what happened. I didn't really stand up to her and assert my demands to stay together. I was content to let it slide with a few apologies and a bit of excess. Now I'm doing my best at the 180, minimizing communication to essential matters. No chit-chat, no asking how you're doing or telling me about your day. None of that. I think she's having a hard time with my hands-off approach. She's incapable of accepting blame for her actions, choosing to play the sufferer. It's a bit sad. She doesn't realize why I share blame for problems in the marriage. This falls entirely on her shoulders. I know the why may never be answered, but the questions will always remain. Tonight was good. We went to my youngest daughter's high school musical. It was fun, but my wife sat next to my mom, who doesn't know she knows. The other betrayed spouse texted me during the show. Memories haunt me, and every time I wishfully hope we can stay together, I think about how I would just be here again in a few months. I'm more and more resolved on divorce. I know it sounds silly at this point. It should be absolutely unquestionable, and the only way forward at this point. But I still reflect on our life and family, wishing we could fix everything and move on. But those moments are just moments. I guess it's part of the process because they only last for moments. And then the reality that she's not worth staying with reasserts itself. I think that's progress, as the question has been asked here so many times. Why? What has caused this seemingly normal person, brought up in a very Christian home and proud of her Christianity, to do something so utterly abhorrent to the very idea and moral boundaries she learned from her earliest childhood? Why? The big finale happened tonight. I tracked her to the parking lot, where her car sat for a while, then went to a store and returned to the lot. As she sat there, I wondered what the hell was going on. I figured she was with him, so I went to check it out. Sure enough, there was her car with his right next to it. I called his wife. We've been talking for a few days, and she suggested I go say hi and grab a picture, so I did. I told her not to come home tonight. Heading home afterward, she called me in tears saying she's sorry. I agreed to let her come and grab her things so she can be gone for a bit. So now all questions are answered, and the story has been written onto the next phase of this little journey. But not so fast. The DNA results of my 3 children have been sitting in the storage where we store our mail for everyone to collect. I had already forgotten about it. It's been sitting there for a couple of weeks. I don't receive a lot of paper mail, which is why I forgot. Maybe because I didn't care to check because I thought they were all mine. But unfortunately, my first son isn't mine. I was so shocked to my core. I didn't expect that she must have been cheating on me during the first years of our marriage. My heart is shattered into different pieces, and I know I have to break the sad news to my children. I'm not going to hide secrets from my children. So I told my son last night. Lots of hugging, lots of crying. My soon-to-be ex-wife was still out of the house since I caught her having an affair with the partner in his car. He's not my biological son, but I have raised him, so he is mine. He's 20 and a man that every father would be proud of. He's not ready to confront his mom. I called my soon-to-be ex-wife on her phone and told her about it. All she did was cry and apologize. She said she wanted to come home, but I told her that it would be a good idea for her to remain wherever she is for the foreseeable future. Truth be told, I feel pretty good. DNA or not, he's still my son. I've never been this close to my kids, and I tell them I love them every day. I'm more relaxed now, and it's over. No more lying, no more worrying. My kids and I are still recovering, but we are at peace. In the coming days, we'll go through emotions, but I see a clear path out of this now.
You never really think it'll happen to you, do you? I mean, all those stories you hear about people cheating on their spouses, ruining lives, ripping families apart. It's the kind of stuff you imagine happens to other people. Not me. Not John, the guy who works his ass off at a corporate job to make sure his family has everything they need. Not to me, who married Megan, the fitness junkie who looked like she was made out of stone but could still soften up enough to be a mom to our two kids, Evan and Lauren. Our life wasn't perfect, but we were doing all right. Or so I thought. Megan, well, she was a fitness instructor. You know the type. Always in those skin-tight yoga pants, spending every waking moment at the gym, and making you feel guilty for grabbing that extra slice of pizza. Meanwhile, I was the typical desk jockey, slaving away at a corporation that couldn't care less about its employees as long as the numbers looked good at the end of the month. Things started going south when Megan kept talking about how tired she was. She'd come home, flop down on the couch, and complain about feeling like she was dragging all the time. At first, I didn't think much of it. She was always pushing herself hard at the gym, always running from one training session to the next. Fatigue made sense, but then the complaints got more serious. She wasn't just tired, she was sick. So, of course, she went to the doctor. I wasn't expecting the phone call I got that day, though. Megan sounded off, almost panicked. "I need to talk to you when I get home," she said. That's it. Nothing else. Just left me hanging with my stomach doing flips, wondering what the hell was going on. When she finally got home, the first words out of her mouth hit me like a sledgehammer. "I have an STD," she said, just like that. No lead up, no sugarcoating, nothing. I blinked. "What?" "A sexually transmitted disease, John. The doctor ran some tests, and that's what it is." Now, here's where most guys would probably lose their cool, throw a tantrum, maybe even start throwing accusations right away. But I just stood there, stunned, trying to process what she was telling me. Megan had an STD. My wife had an STD. The next thing the doctor tells me is that I should get tested too, just to be sure. And you know what? Sure enough, the results came back positive. I had it too. That little fact turned our marriage from a shaky platform to full-on quicksand. The trust, the foundation of everything, was gone just like that. Megan, though, she didn't even flinch. She immediately turned the tables on me. "This is your fault," she snapped the moment we were alone. "Who the hell have you been messing around with?" I stood there in complete disbelief. Me? Cheating? I'd been nothing but faithful to this woman. And here she was, pointing fingers at me, as if I was the one who had been sneaking around. I could feel the anger rising in my chest, but I tried to stay calm. "Megan, are you serious right now? I haven't been with anyone but you. How could you even say that?" But she didn't stop. Megan could be relentless when she wanted to be, and that night, she was out for blood. Every little thing I'd done in the last 6 months got thrown back in my face. I didn't pay enough attention to her. I worked too much. I didn't support her gym goals enough. You name it, it was suddenly my fault. In the middle of her rant, it hit me. Her distance, her late nights at the gym, the sudden new outfits she'd start wearing after work. It all started to make sense. This wasn't my fault. Megan was hiding something, and it wasn't just her gym routine. I kept my cool that night, but in my mind, things started clicking into place. I wasn't stupid. I knew the signs. I'd just been too wrapped up in work and the kids to see what was going on right under my nose. And then there was Jenny, Megan's best friend. Jenny was over all the time, practically part of the family at this point. But lately, I'd noticed something odd. Megan and Jenny always seemed to have these secret little conversations. They'd disappear into another room, leave me sitting in the living room with the kids like some kind of idiot. It started nagging at me. What were they talking about that was so private? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. And it wasn't just Megan's sudden paranoia about me cheating. It was the way she'd gotten colder over the last few months, like she was always a little bit checked out. There was always an excuse. Late at the gym, a client that needed extra help, a friend's emergency. Still, I tried to push through. We had kids, after all. Evan, 10, and Lauren, 7. Sweet kids, but smart. They could feel the tension between us, especially Lauren. She'd look up at me with those wide eyes, asking why Mommy and Daddy were always fighting. I'd sit with her, read her a story, or help her with homework, all the while trying to pretend that everything was fine. But it wasn't. I knew it, and deep down, Megan knew it too. So here we were, two adults barely talking to each other, stuck in the same house, pretending like our marriage wasn't a sinking ship. I could feel the cracks widening every day, but Megan wasn't about to admit to anything. No, she was the victim, the one who'd been wronged, the one who needed me to confess to something I hadn't done. But I wasn't the one hiding something. She was, and I was going to find out what it was. It didn't take long for the doubts to start creeping in. After the whole STD bombshell, Megan got more defensive, more secretive. The woman who used to leave her phone lying around now kept it glued to her side. Always texting, always flipping her screen down the second I got close. I'd catch her in the middle of a message, and she'd act like it was no big deal, brushing it off with a quick smile. "What, you think I'm hiding something?" she'd say, eyes challenging me. It was the same bullshit every time, turning the suspicion back on me as if I was the one sneaking around. Then there was the gym. Megan had always been a gym rat, but now it seemed like her second home. Hell, maybe even her first. She was always there, weekends, late evenings, times she never used to go. It was as if she was avoiding being at home with me and the kids, and it wasn't subtle either. One Saturday morning, I decided to test the waters. I casually mentioned that I wanted to start working out more, get back in shape. I could see her eyes widen for just a split second before she plastered on that fake supportive smile. "Oh, that's great, John. But, maybe not today. I've got a really busy schedule with clients. It'd be hard to fit you in." Fit me in? We were married, for Christ's sake. I didn't need to be fit into her schedule. The excuses kept coming. Every time I suggested going with her, she had a reason why it wasn't convenient. A client needed her extra attention, the gym was packed, or she just didn't feel like being distracted. Distracted by me, apparently. I knew what was up. I wasn't born yesterday. I mean, no one spends that much time at the gym unless they're trying to avoid someone or something. Or, in her case, trying to sneak around. That's when I decided I couldn't keep playing dumb. I needed answers. And if Megan wasn't going to give them to me, I'd find them myself. Hiring a private investigator wasn't a decision I took lightly. But at this point, I was done with her games. I needed the truth, and I needed proof. So I called Michael, recommended by a friend of a friend. He specialized in this kind of thing, and I didn't have any problem trusting him with this dirty job. Michael didn't waste any time. Within 2 weeks, he had everything I needed. I remember the day he handed me the manila envelope, thick with evidence. My stomach dropped as I opened it, knowing that whatever was inside would confirm what I already knew but wasn't ready to face. Photos, videos, all of them showed Megan meeting up with her fitness trainer, Dave. I'd heard her talk about him before, in that casual way she had when she didn't want me to think anything of it. "Oh, Dave said I should try this new routine," or "Dave's been great for my motivation." But now I was staring at pictures of my wife meeting Dave in parking lots, exchanging long glances, even sneaking a kiss before driving off to God knows where. The videos were worse. Grainy footage of them leaving together, their bodies pressed too close for just a client and trainer relationship. I felt a mixture of rage and numbness. Part of me wanted to smash something, to yell at her, confront her right there. But another part of me, maybe the more dangerous part, was cold, calculating. Now wasn't the time for emotion. Now was the time to plan. Over the next few days, I couldn't help but notice every little detail Megan tried to hide. Her phone, always on silent. The way she suddenly started wearing new workout clothes, flashy tight, the kind that screamed, "Look at me." She'd come home late, sweating, but not from any workout I was familiar with. I started piecing it together like a detective in one of those crime shows. The new lingerie in her drawer, the one she hadn't worn for me, that was for Dave, I knew it. The long training sessions that somehow stretched into hours. And then there was Jenny, her best friend, the perfect alibi. Megan would often claim to be spending time with Jenny, grabbing coffee, or having some girl time. But I wasn't stupid. Jenny was the cover. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how often Megan used her as an excuse. Meanwhile, Jenny, bless her clueless soul, had no idea she was being played just like me. It was all too much to ignore. Every time Megan left the house, every time she looked at her phone with that sneaky little smile, it only added fuel to the fire. My mind kept going over every suspicious moment, every lie she told, every time she brushed off my concerns. I started noticing even more things. Her mood swings. One minute she'd be her usual bubbly self, and the next she'd snap at me for the smallest thing. It was like she was always on edge, waiting for something to blow up. Maybe she was scared I'd figure it out. Maybe she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. But I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of an easy out. I wasn't going to explode in some dramatic confrontation. No, I was going to make her sweat. I had the proof now. I had the upper hand, and I was going to use it. Jenny came over one night, as usual. She sat in the living room, chatting away with Megan while I pretended not to care. But I couldn't stop watching them. Megan, laughing too easily, trying too hard to act normal. And Jenny oblivious, thinking everything was fine. Little did they know I was already 5 steps ahead. After Michael handed me that envelope, the path forward was clear. I wasn't going to confront Megan right away. No, that would have been too easy for her, too satisfying. She didn't deserve an explosion, some heated argument where she could twist everything around and try to make me the villain. No, I had something better in mind. Revenge. I started by analyzing the evidence. Those photos and videos were like gold in my hands. They weren't just proof of Megan's betrayal. They were my ticket to making her squirm, to tearing apart the little world she and Dave thought they had built in secret. Dave, the cocky bastard, thought he could mess around with my wife and just walk away like nothing happened. But he had no idea who he was dealing with. I wasn't going to just show Megan the evidence and walk away. That would have been the easy route. And I wasn't about to give her any sort of mercy. I wanted to make her life difficult, slowly, painfully, and I wanted Dave to pay for screwing with my marriage. Literally, I bided my time, playing along like everything was normal at home. Every day, Megan would come home a little later, her excuses growing weaker, her smiles more forced. I watched her, knowing what she was up to, but not saying a damn thing. The tension was palpable. She was nervous, probably wondering if I had figured it out. Maybe that STD scare had gotten to her more than I realized. Either way, I kept my cool. But at night, after the kids were in bed and Megan had retreated to her side of the bed, I was strategizing. I didn't just want Dave to lose Megan. No, I wanted him to lose everything. His job, his reputation, whatever future he thought he had lined up as some hotshot personal trainer. He didn't deserve to keep coasting along after what he did. So, I made an appointment with the gym's management, under the pretense of wanting to discuss a potential membership upgrade. A bullshit reason, but it got me in the door. When I sat down with the manager, a middle-aged guy named Robert, I could tell he wasn't ready for what I was about to unload. I started by showing him the photos, Megan and Dave sneaking around, not exactly hiding their little rendezvous. Robert's face went from confused to shocked in a matter of seconds. I'm not here to cause a scene, I told him, keeping my voice calm and measured, even though I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. But I think you want to take a look at these. Your employee, Dave, has been getting a little too friendly with one of his clients. I slid the photos across the desk and watched Robert's eyes widen. He wasn't just shocked, he was pissed. The gym had a reputation to uphold, after all, and the last thing they wanted was a scandal involving a trainer screwing around with a married client. If this goes public, I continued, it could be bad for business. But I'm willing to keep it quiet, on one condition. You fire Dave, no questions asked, and make sure he doesn't get any glowing recommendations for his next job. Make it hard for him to find work in this town. Robert didn't argue. He knew I had them cornered. Within the hour, Dave was out of a job. Just like that, I'd stripped him of his livelihood. But I wasn't done yet. On my way out, I ran into Bob, one of the gym's older employees. Bob wasn't exactly close to Dave, And from the way he talked, I could tell he didn't have much respect for the guy either. He'd seen Dave's antics for a while, flirting with clients, taking advantage of his position. It wasn't new, but apparently Megan was just the latest in a long line of poor decisions. Bob wasn't shy about helping me out. "I've seen what he's been doing," Bob said, keeping his voice low as we chatted near the gym's front desk. "I don't like how he treats people here. You did the right thing." We exchanged numbers, and Bob promised to keep me updated on any fallout. He didn't need much convincing. He was just as eager to see Dave go down as I was. Meanwhile, at home, I kept playing the long game with Megan. Every time she came home from her sessions at the gym, I could see the nervous energy radiating off her. Maybe she was starting to sense that things weren't adding up. Maybe Dave was feeling the heat from his sudden unemployment, or maybe it was just her own guilt catching up to her. Either way, she was on edge, and I loved it. I started messing with her head, just a little. I'd make offhand comments about the gym, about how Dave must be so busy with all his clients. I could see her face tense up, her smile faltering. She didn't know I already knew everything, and that uncertainty was eating away at her. One night, as we sat down for dinner, I casually mentioned, "Hey, I heard the gym fired one of their trainers. Tough break, huh?" I watched her eyes flicker with panic for just a split second before she composed herself. "Oh yeah," she said, forcing a smile. "I think I heard about that, but I didn't know him very well." Liar. I could feel the power shift right there at the table. She was slipping, and she knew it. But I wasn't going to let her off the hook just yet. Let her squirm a little longer. The longer I waited, the more anxious she got. Megan's little affair with Dave was crumbling, and she had no idea I was the one pulling the strings. She still thought she was in control, still thought she could keep me in the dark. But I wasn't just going to let this blow over. Not yet. I had more in store for both of them, and by the time I was done, Megan wouldn't even recognize the life she had once thought was so secure. This wasn't just about getting even. It was about making sure she knew, deep down, that she had messed with the wrong man. And I was just getting started. I'd already destroyed Dave's career, and Megan was teetering on the edge, though she didn't know it yet. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. There was one more move I needed to make. Something more personal, something that would cut even deeper. That's where Jenny came in. Jenny had always been around. Megan's best friend since college. She was over at our house constantly, popping by for drinks, dinner, or just to gossip with Megan about whatever drama was going on in their little circle. At first, I hadn't thought much of her. She was nice enough, and we got along, but I never paid her any special attention. But recently, after everything that had gone down with Megan, I started noticing things. The way Jenny's eyes would linger on me just a little too long. How her laugh would come a bit too easily whenever I cracked a joke. Maybe it was all in my head, or maybe it was real. But one thing was certain, she was attracted to me. And once I saw that, the next step in my revenge became obvious. I didn't plan it right away. At first, it was just a thought. A dark, twisted fantasy about getting back at Megan by seducing her best friend. But the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like the perfect move. If I could have Jenny, if I could sleep with her and make it clear that Megan's betrayal wasn't just one-sided, it would crush her. She would lose her husband and her best friend all in one blow. The opportunity came one Friday evening when Megan was out at the gym, probably meeting up with Dave. Not that he was much help to her now that he was unemployed. Jenny came over for what seemed like a casual visit, just a glass of wine and some idle chatter. But as soon as she walked through the door, I could feel the tension in the air. I played it cool, keeping the conversation light at first. We sat on the couch, a bottle of wine between us, and talked about everything and nothing. But there was something different in Jenny's demeanor that night. She was playful. Maybe it was the wine, or maybe it was something more, but her laughter came a little too easily, and her hand rested on my arm a little longer than necessary. I started testing the waters, throwing out subtle compliments, seeing how far I could push before she'd push back. But she never did. Every compliment I gave, Every little flirtatious remark I made, she accepted with a smile and a blush. It was almost too easy. At one point, Jenny made some joke about how Megan's lucky to have you. And that's when I knew I had her. I leaned in a little closer, letting my voice drop to that low, conspiratorial tone that makes things feel more intimate. Lucky, I said with a smirk. I don't know about that. Sometimes I wonder if she even notices I'm still around. Jenny's eyes met mine, and there was something unspoken there, a connection we both understood but didn't need to put into words. She bit her lip, clearly unsure of what to say, but the way she looked at me said enough. She was intrigued. She was interested. I slid closer to her on the couch, letting my knee brush against hers. She didn't move away. You know, I said, keeping my voice soft, sometimes I think it's nice just to talk to someone who actually sees me. Her breath hitched slightly, and she shifted in her seat, clearly flustered but not backing away. I could feel the electricity between us, the tension building with every second that passed. And then, without thinking, no, scratch that, I knew exactly what I was doing. I reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, letting my fingers graze her cheek. Jenny froze, her eyes wide, but she didn't pull away. "You're beautiful," I murmured, leaning in just a fraction closer. Her lips parted slightly, her breath shallow, and in that moment, I knew she wanted it as much as I did. The next move was hers. She could pull away, laugh it off, pretend like this wasn't happening. Or she could lean into it, let it happen, and she leaned. Before I knew it, her lips were on mine, soft and hesitant at first, but growing more confident with each passing second. I kissed her back, feeling a surge of satisfaction, not just from the physical act, but from knowing what this would mean for Megan when she eventually found out. We didn't waste any time after that. One thing led to another, and before long, we were tangled up in each other, lost in the heat of the moment. It wasn't love, not by a long shot. It wasn't even lust. It was revenge, pure and simple, and it felt damn good. When it was over, we lay there in silence for a while, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. Jenny seemed a little dazed, maybe even regretful, but I didn't feel an ounce of guilt. This was all part of the plan. For her, maybe it had been a mistake, a one-night slip-up she'd want to forget. But for me, it was a calculated move, a way to humiliate Megan on a deeper level, to take something from her that she would never be able to get back. I could see the guilt start to creep into Jenny's eyes as she pulled her clothes back on, fumbling with her blouse as if she was suddenly ashamed of what we'd done. But I didn't say anything to reassure her. I didn't need to. I had gotten what I wanted, and that was enough. As she left, she hesitated at the door, her voice soft and uncertain. This stays between us, right? I gave her a smile, that cold, calculated one I'd been perfecting over the past few weeks. Of course, our little secret. She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. Maybe she already knew that secrets like this never stay buried for long. After she left, I sat back on the couch, a feeling of triumph washing over me. Megan was still out, oblivious to the fact that her husband and best friend had just betrayed her in the most intimate way possible. She thought she was in control, thought she could keep up her little charade with Dave. But when she eventually found out about Jenny and me, it would destroy her. And I couldn't wait to see the look on her face when it all came crashing down. The beauty of it all? Megan was still completely unaware, still carrying on with her life as if nothing was wrong. She had no idea that her best friend had just spent the night in our bed, and that made my victory all the sweeter. I knew the moment had come. After weeks of letting Megan squirm, playing her own guilt and paranoia against her, it was time to pull the plug. The satisfaction I'd been waiting for, the final blow that would shatter her world, was right in front of me. It was a Friday night, and the kids were asleep. I'd been thinking about this confrontation for days, running it over in my head, imagining how it would go down. Part of me wanted it to be a screaming match, The kind where all the pent-up frustration and anger could finally spill out. But the colder, more methodical part of me knew that staying calm, staying detached, would hurt her more. If she thought she could manipulate me, twist things to make herself the victim, I'd shut that down immediately. I found her in the living room, scrolling through her phone, probably texting Dave. The thought of it made me sick, but I kept my face blank. She looked up as I entered the room, her expression neutral. She hadn't a clue what was coming. "Megan," I said, my voice low and steady. "We need to talk." There must have been something in my tone, because her eyes flickered with a bit of nervousness. "What's going on?" she asked, setting her phone down, but not too far. Always keeping it close. I didn't waste any time. I pulled out the envelope Michael had given me weeks ago, the one filled with photos and videos of her and Dave sneaking around like a couple of horny teenagers. I tossed it on the coffee table between us. She stared at it, not moving, her face frozen. "What's that?" she asked, her voice already starting to crack. She knew. Deep down, she knew what was inside. "Open it," I said, crossing my arms as I leaned against the back of the couch. My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice calm, emotionless. Megan's hands trembled as she reached for the envelope. She opened it slowly, as if dragging it out would somehow change what was inside. But nothing could change what was in there. The truth was right in front of her. As she pulled out the photos, her face went pale. She flicked through them in silence, her eyes widening with every image. I could see the panic setting in, the realization that her little secret wasn't a secret anymore. She started, but I cut her off. "Don't. Just don't." I took out my phone and pressed play on one of the videos Michael had captured. It was grainy, shot from a distance, but it was enough. Enough to show her sneaking out of a parking lot with Dave, their hands all over each other. "I know everything, Megan. The affair with Dave, the lies, the excuses. All of it." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock. For a moment, she tried to recover, to play innocent like she always did. "John, it's not what you think. He's just—" "Don't lie to me," I snapped, my voice cutting through her pathetic attempt at denial. "I have the photos, the videos. I've known for weeks, so don't even try to deny it." Her face crumpled, and I could see the cracks in her composure. Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a second, I thought she was going to cry. But it wasn't real. None of it was real. "John, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. I was lonely, and you weren't there for me. You've been so distant, so wrapped up in work." There it was, the same old song and dance. She was going to turn this around on me, make herself the victim, try to blame her affair on me. The anger that had been simmering inside me for so long finally bubbled over. "Don't you dare," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Don't you dare try to blame this on me. You're the one who cheated. You're the one who lied. Don't act like I'm the reason you decided to spread your legs for him." Her tears started falling then, but I didn't care. I'd seen this act before, and I wasn't buying it. "Not this time. I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice cold and final. "And I'm going to fight for full custody of the kids." At that, her sobbing got louder. "No, John, please. We can work this out. Think about Evan and Lauren. They need us both." "I am thinking about them," I said sharply, "which is why I'm going to make sure they don't have to grow up in a house with a cheating mother." Megan collapsed onto the couch, her head in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. I could feel the tiniest bit of satisfaction, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. Just when I thought it was over, the front door creaked open, and Jenny stepped inside. I hadn't expected her to show up tonight, but in a twisted way, it was perfect timing. This was going to get even uglier. Megan looked up through her tears, seeing her best friend enter the room. "Jenny, please tell him. Tell him it was a mistake. Tell him." But Jenny's face was as pale as a ghost. She walked slowly toward us, her hands trembling. "Megan," she whispered, her voice filled with guilt. "There's something I need to tell you." I watched as the words struggled to form on Jenny's lips. She glanced at me, then back at Megan, her eyes filled with shame. "What is it?" Megan asked, her voice thick with tears. Jenny took a deep breath and looked Megan straight in the eye. I contracted an STD, Megan, and it wasn't from anyone I've been seeing. It was from John. Megan froze, her sobs stopping abruptly as the words hit her. It was as if the ground had been ripped out from under her. Her face twisted in disbelief, then horror, then rage. "You what?" Megan's voice was barely a whisper. Jenny kept talking, unable to stop the flood of guilt. "I'm sorry. We slept together. It was just once, but it happened." For a second, I thought Megan might explode, scream, yell, throw something, but she didn't. Instead, she just sat there, her whole body shaking, her mind struggling to process what had just been dropped on her. The betrayal from her best friend, the reality of what I had done. And that was it. Megan was broken. I could see it in her eyes. The affair with Dave was nothing compared to what she had just found out. The man she had cheated on, the husband she thought she had under her thumb, had slept with her best friend. And there was no going back from that. I turned to leave, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't need to say anything else. The damage was done, and Megan's world had just collapsed around her. The last thing I heard as I walked out the door was her broken sobs, the sound of her life shattering into pieces. And for the first time in months, I felt free. The day the divorce was finalized felt like stepping into the sunlight after years of living in a dark, suffocating tunnel. It was official. Megan was no longer part of my life. The kids were with me most of the time, and the shackles of a toxic marriage were finally broken. The relief that washed over me was indescribable. For the first time in years, I could breathe freely. In the months leading up to that moment, I had been planning for something bigger, something I had put on the back burner for far too long. Megan had always found a way to shoot down my dreams, constantly reminding me how risky it was, how unsafe it would be for the family. And like a fool, I let her. I let her keep me stuck in a life that I didn't really want. But now there was nothing standing in my way. I had always dreamed of opening my own business, a small tech consulting firm. I had the skills, the experience, the connections. Hell, I'd been doing it for years, working for other people, making them rich while I stayed stagnant. The difference now was that I was doing it for myself. With Megan gone, I poured myself into the business with the kind of passion I hadn't felt in years. I rented a small office space downtown and started making calls. At first, it was slow. A few contracts here and there, nothing big. But as word got out, as people saw what I could offer, things started to take off. I remember the first time I signed a major client. It was a healthcare company looking to overhaul their entire IT infrastructure. It was a massive project, more than I'd ever taken on by myself before, but I didn't hesitate. I took the leap, and it paid off. Within a year, my business was booming. I had more work than I could handle on my own, so I hired a few more people, old colleagues who trusted me and wanted to work for someone who wasn't a corporate robot. We worked hard, sure, but it was on my terms. I was calling the shots, and it felt incredible. Every new contract, every successful project was a reminder that I didn't need Megan, that I never needed her holding me back. I was free. As my business grew, so did my confidence. I wasn't just a guy trying to get through the day anymore. I was successful. I was building something real, something that was mine. And with that success came a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. No more games, no more manipulation. Just me and the life I was carving out for myself and my kids. And then there was Megan. Her life, on the other hand, was unraveling. Word got around about the affair. It always does in these situations. First, it was whispers at the gym, in the PDA, among her friends. People started to distance themselves, not openly at first, but it was enough that she noticed. The invitations to social events stopped coming. Her so-called friends disappeared, one by one, until she was left with no one. The same gym where she'd spent hours with Dave, The place where her life had spiraled out of control became a place of shame for her. People knew. They talked behind her back. Her reputation crumbled faster than she could put up her defenses. She tried to keep up appearances, but I could see it was killing her. The strong, confident woman who had once dominated every room she entered was now a shell of her former self. She was lonely, isolated, and worst of all, she knew it was her own fault. She had thrown away her family, her friends, her reputation for a man who didn't even stick around. I heard through the grapevine that Dave moved on pretty quickly. He found another job in a different town, probably because he couldn't face the fallout of what happened either. And Megan? She was left with nothing but regret. The few times we had to communicate, mostly about the kids, she seemed broken. The sharp, biting remarks that once came so easily from her were gone. She barely even looked me in the eye. I wasn't interested in her guilt or her apologies. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. Meanwhile, I was thriving. My business continued to grow, and with each success, I felt lighter, more liberated. The control Megan once had over me, emotionally, mentally, was gone. I wasn't weighed down by her criticisms or her constant need to undermine everything I wanted to do. Evan and Lauren adjusted well to the new normal. They were happy, happier than I'd seen them in a long time. Our home became a place of laughter again, free from the tension that had suffocated us for so long. I spent more time with them, real quality time, without Megan's constant interruptions or snide remarks. I was finally able to be the dad I wanted to be, not the one she tried to mold me into. There were moments when I'd catch myself thinking about how things had played out, how Megan's life had spiraled downward while mine had taken off. I didn't feel sorry for her. Not one bit. She had made her choices, and this was the consequence. For me, it was a new beginning, a fresh start. The toxic marriage that had once defined me was nothing but a memory now. And as I looked ahead, I knew that my life, my business, my relationship with my kids, and the peace I had found was mine to control. No one else's. Megan had lost everything, but I had gained something far more valuable: my freedom.
My wife, Sherry, believed I was unaware of her plans, thinking I was either foolish or oblivious to her growing affair with her coworker Todd. She assumed I'd tolerate her actions and accept her continuing to be involved with him. However, she had another thing coming. She didn't realize I'd been suspicious for quite some time. I noticed changes, clear signs of infidelity, like working late frequently, upgrading her wardrobe, more aggressive closeness, and a loss of interest in our shared interests. Despite my attempts to discuss my concerns, she consistently ignored them. Sherry, naturally, denied anything was wrong, attributing it to my insecurities and possessiveness working overtime. I had no choice but to hire a private investigator. I refused to remain blind to the truth. I'd made it clear from the beginning of our relationship, and reiterated it over our 10-year marriage, that I would never tolerate my wife cheating on me. So it was with mixed feelings that I sat in private investigator Jake Sloan's office and listened to his report. I felt relieved when he made it clear that Sherry hadn't cheated. However, that relief was short-lived when he added the term, "for now." As he explained, my wife was having an affair. It just hadn't escalated to something intimate, but it was only a matter of time. Apparently, Sherry and Todd referred to themselves as working spouses. I detested that term. Sherry had only one spouse, me. Some might find that expression cute and harmless, but to me, it meant she was having an intimate relationship with someone else. Well, as it turns out, that's exactly what she was having. According to the private investigator's report, Sherry and Todd had lunch together daily, just the two of them. They held hands and sat next to each other. He provided numerous photos of them hugging, sometimes even kissing. I was infuriated by what I saw and wanted to strangle that smug idiot Todd. In addition to lunches, the lovers often worked late together, even though there was no good reason for it. It was as if they wanted to avoid going home to their respective spouses and siphon as much of our time out of each day as possible. The detective told me that he was able to trace Sherry's emails and messages.
I knew this was completely illegal and I could never use it in a divorce. In our state, divorce for infidelity was possible but difficult. No-fault divorces were much easier, and I didn't need evidence for that anyway. I just wanted it for my own purposes. Sloan refused to give me copies of the actual messages. He wouldn't even let me see them. Instead, he offered me a summary of what they contained. He assured me that my wife had never spoken disparagingly of me. Several times Todd tried to disparage me, but Sherry wouldn't let him. Well, I guess it could have been worse. Emails and texts confirmed their romantic relationship. Although neither of them professed love, their conversations were very intimate, bordering on texting. Todd sent my wife pictures of his buddy, which she took delight in reciprocating with shots of her bare chest. As far as Sloan could tell, she hadn't sent any explicit pictures yet. As I sat in his office pondering my next steps, Sloan gave me the worst news of all. Todd's wife was going out of town for 3 days to visit her mother. The lovers decided to take the opportunity to meet up and consummate their relationship. The only thing standing in their way was me. They were uncertain about how they could spend the night together if I remained in the vicinity. Since I had no intention of leaving town, making it nearly impossible, they contemplated various plans. One idea was to inform me that Sherry was going on a girls-only weekend trip, fearing I might discover the truth by talking to her friends. However, she didn't want to involve anyone to create a believable cover story, leading to the abandonment of that idea. Another option they considered was compelling me to leave town, but I dismissively remembered Sherry suggesting I organize a golf trip with my buddies, an option I rejected. Ultimately, they opted for a new but direct approach: honesty. Todd believed I was on the path to becoming a betrayed man and that I would do anything to keep Sherry as my loving, happy wife, even allowing her to have an affair. Somehow, he convinced Sherry that by sleeping with him, she would enhance our lovemaking life and relationship. He persuaded her that all she needed to do was disclose her plans with Todd to me, and I would reluctantly agree to let her proceed. Clearly, Todd underestimated my resolve, but what surprised me the most was that Sherry bought into his deceptive narrative. It should have been evident to her that I wouldn't tolerate this, and if she failed to realize that, then she might be mentally unstable. Sloan informed me that this was all the information they had, so I accepted what he provided and went home. I requested him to continue monitoring Sherry's messages and update me if anything changed. On Friday, Sloan called me and informed me that Sherry planned to meet me the following Monday after work. She intended to disclose that she would go on a date with Todd on Friday night, starting with dinner and dancing and culminating with the couple spending the night in a hotel room. She would thoughtfully return to my house on Saturday or maybe Sunday, depending on their activities. Sherry and Todd rehearsed her entire speech, convincing themselves that I would acquiesce to her demands. They anticipated my initial upset and anger, but Sherry planned to assure me that it was a one-time thing, despite both knowing otherwise. She even suggested having lovemaking with me afterward as a reward for my understanding, assuming I would be pleased to have Todd's sloppy seconds and comply with her wishes. How considerate of them to think of my needs. With only 2 days to prepare for the confrontation, Sherry and Todd jokingly referred to it as an intervention. However, I was determined to turn their intervention into my stand. Over the weekend, I contemplated various scenarios, pondering whether I wanted to salvage my marriage. My plan of action evolved organically as I considered my feelings for Sherry. I decided to confront the issue directly and end it for good. Initially blissfully happy when we first got married, Sherry and I spent all our time together, sharing everything we had experienced in life. She was my best friend and my best lover, but somehow it all seemed to disappear. Perhaps that's just the way things work. Nothing lasts forever. Maybe my view of marriage was old-fashioned and idealized, envisioning us as a team facing life's trials and tribulations together. Having experienced unsuccessful marriages before, Sherry and I questioned whether the problem lay with us or the institution of marriage itself. How can people expect to maintain feelings, desires, interests, and passions when fate insists on being fickle and changing everything and everyone? In a world of fast-paced culture, social media, and instant gratification, perhaps marriage, like dinosaurs and CDs, is obsolete. Briefly considering the idea of letting Sherry be with Todd, I quickly dismissed it, refusing to let him claim rights to my wife. I was ready for a fight when my wife called me just after lunch on Monday. "Hey, Sherry," I said, noting her recent lack of calls during my work hours. I expressed my concern about it and hoped everything was okay. She greeted me with a "Hi, honey," which made me wonder if she used the same endearment with Todd. Despite the thought, I brushed it off and inquired about her being home on time tonight, as she had something important to discuss. Responding positively, I mentioned having important news as well, and confirmed my availability around 5:15. However, she didn't respond immediately, and I sensed her motive for asking. When she asked about the nature of my big news, I decided to keep it for our later face-to-face conversation. I excused myself, citing the urgency of my monthly report, and hung up. I then informed my boss about taking the rest of the day off, and he didn't mind. Sitting at the kitchen table later, I anxiously awaited her arrival. The garage door opened at 5:27, and despite my high emotions, I maintained a calm exterior. I had an open bottle of Sauvignon Blanc on ice and 2 glasses ready. She entered alone, tossing her keys and purse on the table, and I felt relieved she hadn't brought Todd along, which would have complicated things. I welcomed her with a smile. "Hi, sweetheart," I greeted her warmly, using the affectionate term she had employed earlier. I welcomed her home and asked whether she needed some time before our conversation or if she preferred to dive right in. My immediate desire to talk took her by surprise, and I could tell she wasn't prepared for it so soon. My goal was to keep her in suspense and maintain the upper hand. Acknowledging her surprise at my readiness to talk, Sherry admitted she hadn't expected me to wait. Nevertheless, she agreed that starting our conversation sooner would be better and joined me at the table. I proposed the idea of sharing my news first and inquired if she had any objections. Hesitantly, she responded, indicating that it was okay and expressing a slight uncertainty. Without waiting for her response, I poured us both a glass of wine. She accepted it gratefully, drinking half before I refilled her glass. Starting to discuss my thoughts on the matter, I conveyed that I had been reflecting on it a lot. I made it clear that I wouldn't beat around the bush and saw no point in dragging it out. Pausing deliberately to create tension, I observed Sherry stepping forward, her gaze fixed on me. Curious, she asked, "What's the matter?" I conveyed my desire for a divorce, stating it bluntly and allowing a few moments for Sherry to grasp the message. Initially, confusion clouded her face, as if the words weren't registering. Eventually, understanding dawned, and she reacted with shock. Fear and anxiety briefly flickered across her expression, quickly replaced by surprise, perhaps stemming from concerns about her affair with Todd being exposed. In response to her query about the reason, I disclosed that my feelings had changed, expressing, "I don't love you anymore." My words appeared to affect Sherry deeply. Struggling to comprehend my statement, she questioned, "You what?" "I've fallen out of love with you, Sherry," I declared, sharing the fabricated detail that I couldn't recall the exact moment. In truth, I was well aware it had been a long time, but I had avoided confronting the reality. Perplexed, she asked, "What are you talking about?" Her expression hinted at an impending emotional breakdown, catching me off guard. In an attempt to illustrate my perspective, I prompted her to recall the early days of our marriage. Reminiscing about our shared activities and routines, I highlighted the close bond we once had. Sherry nodded in agreement as I continued, mentioning our joint lunches, the anticipation of returning home to each other, and shared hobbies, including the pottery classes she had persuaded me to join. Her intense gaze indicated she was captivated by the memories. It wasn't about the pottery, it was about sharing the experience with her. She expressed that she loved every minute of it, watching me and assisting me. She admired my enthusiasm. Similarly, painting the Christmas Village buildings became a shared activity we enjoyed. We purchased a dozen unpainted houses, creating a display for Christmas. It was a tedious task, but we found pleasure in it. Sherry admitted that mine were always better than hers. Recalling the night spent at the table applying paint to the shingles, Sherry nodded in agreement. Back then, I loved her deeply. We also dedicated hours to painting large posters she had acquired during a trip to Myrtle Beach, long before adult coloring books became popular. Although we still had hundreds of coloring pens, they, like our love, had all dried up. When Sherry defensively asserted that her love hadn't dried up, I chose to ignore her and continued. Our friends often expressed jealousy over our relationship. We did everything together, taking long walks daily while holding hands. If I needed to run errands, such as going to the hardware store for grass trimmer line, She would accompany me. Similarly, if she wanted to shop for clothes, I would patiently wait outside the dressing room. Sherry challenged me, noting that I didn't enjoy accompanying her during shopping trips. I explained that I was often on my phone, not particularly interested in the clothes, but rather there to be with her. I emphasized that I didn't mind what she chose, finding her beautiful in everything. I mentioned that I could have stayed home watching sports, but chose to be with her instead. We discussed how other women in the neighborhood gathered for activities like bingo or bachelorette parties, but Sherry never showed interest. Recalling her reason for not participating, I acknowledged her previous comment about preferring to hang out with me than with the chickens. Reflecting on our shared moments, we remembered cuddling under the covers on many nights, watching a favorite movie. Sherry, wiping a tear away, expressed her love for the film. I mentioned that we must have watched it at least 100 times and expressed a desire to continue watching it together. In response to my mention of divorce, Sherry exclaimed her reluctance to end the marriage. She envisioned growing old together, taking cooking and ballroom dancing lessons, or simply lying in bed and reading books. Expressing the growing estrangement between us, I admitted uncertainty about when it began, looking intently into her eyes. We transitioned from dining out 2 or 3 days a week to a weekly occurrence, a change largely influenced by Sherry. She claimed a lack of time for lunch outside the office, which turned out to be untrue. She continued eating out, but with someone else. Eventually, we ceased having lunch together entirely, and I started joining my coworkers. I gradually found enjoyment in their company, perhaps even too much. In the conversation, I exaggerated the situation, making an effort not to place blame solely on Sherry. I wanted to avoid triggering defensiveness or turning the discussion into a scolding. That wasn't my goal, at least not yet. Our habit of coming home early to spend time together lost its significance. We began working later and later, and when we finally did return home, we often felt distant or distracted. Responding to Sherry's question about why I never talked about it, I acknowledged that she was right. Despite having expressed these concerns many times before, I agreed with her, expressing a wish to understand why spending time together hadn't been important for her. I admitted feeling a sense of failure in that regard. I felt like I was taking responsibility for our estrangement. That was far from the truth. I knew that if I hit Sherry with Todd first, we couldn't end the discussion without it getting nasty. I would never make her see my side of things. I'd be the controlling, jealous idiot before I revealed what I knew. I wanted her to remember what we had and think about her role in destroying it. Gradually, we stopped doing almost everything together. You started going to your bachelorette parties, I started going to poker nights, you'd go to spas on the weekends, I'd go golfing. Sherry and I began to spend entire days without discussing anything beyond the weather or the latest news. Our lovemaking life also suffered, with fatigue or lack of interest often hindering our closeness. Reflecting on our early days of marriage, I pointed out how we couldn't get enough of each other. We used to engage in intimate activities 4 or 5 days a week, sometimes multiple times a day. I mentioned playfully fondling her while she cooked, skipping dinner to spend the night together. Activities like going to the hot tub, which used to be a regular part of our routine, had become non-existent for over a year. When Sherry suggested that I didn't want lovemaking anymore, I refuted the idea, finding it baseless. I believed she might be trying to shift blame onto me to justify her own behavior. In response, I laughed and clarified, "Oh God, no, I never stopped wanting lovemaking. I'm just as eager now as I was 10 years ago. I simply stopped wanting lovemaking with you." I knew that would hurt deeply. She thought she had rejected me physically, and here I was telling her that our lack of lovemaking was because I didn't want her. I almost would have laughed if I hadn't been so hurt. Sherry, taken aback, asked what I meant when I mentioned she didn't want to have lovemaking with me. I casually mentioned losing interest and described how, from my perspective, she seemed unresponsive and disinterested in anything exciting or remotely naughty. I suggested that it appeared as though she wanted to finish quickly and move on to more interesting activities like knitting. Expressing my desire for weekend lovemaking marathons, I emphasized that she didn't even want me to give her an incredible pleasure. I labeled our physical encounters as boring and claimed that I had faked enjoyment in the last few instances just to get it over with. When Sherry objected, claiming that I came inside her, I reminded her that she insisted on using contraceptives, despite being on birth control. I explained that she never paid attention to the contraceptives, making it easy for me to fake it by humming, rolling off, and disposing of the empty contraceptive. Her reaction was one of shock and embarrassment, and I admitted that my plan had worked. Apologizing, I added insult to injury by suggesting, "It was me, not you." She stared at me for a moment, her face flushed, tears dried. I wasn't sure if her expression reflected anger, frustration, or embarrassment. In an attempt to ease the tension, I refilled her empty glass, and she took a big sip. Continuing, I explained that it was only a matter of time before we started seeking companionship elsewhere. I clarified that when I said someone else, I didn't mean myself, though she wasn't aware of that distinction. Suddenly, Sherry asked angrily if I was cheating on her or in love with someone else. In response, I reassured her of my commitment to our marriage and emphasized my aversion to infidelity. I acknowledged our shared history of being betrayed by our previous spouses, expressing my dedication to not repeating those mistakes. Sherry apologized, recognizing the unfair accusation and agreeing that she knew I wouldn't engage in such behavior. However, she looked guilty and couldn't meet my gaze, her hands trembling. Transitioning to the topic of our intimate relationship, I suggested waiting until after the divorce to be together for the first time, hinting at a new love interest. I then revealed my big news, stating that I had met with my lawyer and finalized the paperwork. I informed her that she would be served with divorce papers on Friday. In response to her desperate inquiry, I reiterated that she would indeed be served on Friday, attempting to conceal a smile. I explained that it was for the best, allowing both of us to regain our freedom, and acknowledged that the last 10 years had been a waste of our time. I expressed that the past years weren't a waste of time for me, and suggested to Sherry that she likely desired the divorce as much as I did. I mentioned that it seemed she hadn't wanted to be with me for a long time, labeling our wedding as a mistake. Sherry objected, expressing her unwillingness to get a divorce. She insisted that she loved me and wanted to be married forever. Regrettably, I responded that I no longer loved her, citing the no-fault divorce state we were in. I explained that splitting assets equally was the norm, and we could avoid a messy legal process unless one of us cheated and infidelity could be proven, which was unlikely in our case. I proposed dividing our money equally, planning to visit the bank the next day. I mentioned the need to open new accounts, get new credit cards, change utility bills, and sell the house, with a realtor scheduled to put it on the market on Wednesday. Sherry, feeling overwhelmed, objected, expressing uncertainty and asking me to stop. She cried again as I assured her that I had already packed my things and would be staying in a hotel until a permanent move. I suggested she stay in the house until it was sold. Sherry shouted for me to wait, but I insisted there was no need, emphasizing the urgency to handle everything before Friday. Confused, she demanded to know the significance of that particular day. I casually mentioned that Friday was the day she had planned a date with Todd, her boyfriend. I suggested it was the day they intended to spend the night in a hotel together for a passionate evening. Sherry froze, her eyes wide and mouth agape. As she attempted to respond, I pulled out a folder containing a summary report from a private investigator. I showed her the section detailing her plans with Todd on Friday night. Interrupting her, I pointed out that the report confirmed their reservations at the Gaylord Texas for that night. When she started to explain, I cut her off, mockingly suggesting she might claim, "It's not what it looks like." I reminded her of the pictures capturing her and Todd kissing at lunch. Staring at me, tears streaming down her face, Sherry apologized quietly. With a wide smile on my face, I declared, "Now I remember exactly when I stopped loving you." I revealed that it was the day I discovered her plans to involve me in a betrayed man scenario, mirroring the betrayal from my ex-wife. She blurted out an apology, desperately trying to convince me that she didn't love Todd. According to her, the rendezvous with him was just a fling to rekindle our relationship. She assured me that after spending the night with Todd, we would spend the rest of the weekend having passionate lovemaking. She claimed Todd said it would turn me on and revitalize our sensuality. I countered, expressing my skepticism about revitalizing our lovemaking life by being with someone else instead of having it with me. I questioned the logic behind her actions. She attempted to change tactics, mentioning that Todd said I would be okay with it if it made her happy. I reiterated that I wanted her to be happy with me as we used to be, not with another man. I couldn't fathom how she thought I would be okay with such a proposition, given my clear stance against infidelity. She tried to justify her actions by claiming it wouldn't be infidelity since she would have my permission. Firmly, I stated that it would never happen, realizing that I should have understood that from the beginning. I expressed my disbelief at how I could have allowed boredom and loneliness to lead me down this path. I admitted that Todd had sparked my interest again. In response to her questioning how I could be bored and lonely when we were happily in love, I acknowledged that I didn't know. She continued, suggesting that I might have felt that way because I cut us off, stopped having lunch with her, and avoided spending time together. She accused me of choosing to put myself in that position and spending time with Todd instead of her, creating a situation where both Todd and I were bored and lonely. She denied the accusation, insisting that she couldn't believe she would have intentionally distanced herself. She recounted how I had told her I was too busy for lunch, and on one occasion, I had even texted her to go without me. She believed it was my decision for us to stop having lunch, and I never mentioned it, which she thought indicated I didn't realize the change. Sherry expressed that I had been so absorbed in my world with Todd that I didn't notice I was losing her. She declared that she didn't want Todd. She wanted me and us to be the way we used to be. Apologizing, she admitted to screwing up and giving up on us. I insisted it was too late, shaking my head in disagreement. Sherry pleaded, promising to quit her job, work elsewhere, and never see Todd again. She professed her love for me and claimed she hadn't cheated because they didn't have lovemaking. She acknowledged her foolishness, stating that Todd meant nothing to her and begging me not to leave. I maintained that it wasn't that simple, disagreeing when she said I stopped her before she went too far. I argued that just lovemaking would have sealed the deal. Sherry protested, saying they were just friends, and I countered, emphasizing that she should have been friends with me more than anyone else. Overwhelmed, Sherry dropped her head in her arms, sobbing, and vowed never to neglect me or take me for granted again. Sherry pleaded with me, asking if we could treat the situation as a big mistake and begging for forgiveness. I responded, stating that it wasn't just a mistake but a betrayal of our love. She insisted that her heart had always been mine, and I was the one who was willing to give my body to another man. I reminded her that she stopped me and questioned if my love for her was so insignificant that I couldn't fight for it. Expressing that she meant everything to me and that I'd fight for her, Sherry claimed she would die for me. I harshly declared my lack of affection, causing her to scream and attempt to pull me towards her. Despite her apologies and pleas, I asserted that while I believed she was sorry, it didn't change the fact that I no longer loved her. I assured her that she had Todd for comfort. Upon her revelation that Todd was married and only interested in a physical relationship, I grinned and suggested that his wife might have something to say about that. I informed her that both Todd's wife and I had used the same divorce attorney, handing her a folder containing the investigator's report, pictures of her with Todd, and details of the divorce proposal. I advised her to read the entire document. Sherry pleaded with me not to take such actions, suggesting that if I wanted to accompany her to the bank, I should call and let her know. I got up from the table and walked out of the house, ignoring the sound of my wife crying. Update. Sherry grappled with the divorce, and to avoid a prolonged and expensive legal battle, I agreed when the judge recommended marriage counseling. The counseling surpassed my expectations, fostering open and judgment-free communication between Sherry and me. She gained insight into why Todd's advances nearly jeopardized our marriage, and I conveyed the pain and humiliation she had caused. The counselor took pride in our progress. After a few sessions, I returned home, and we shared several passionate moments. Sherry willingly embraced my desires erotically. A year later, we had rekindled the loving connection we shared at the onset of our marriage. Sherry switched jobs and joined my company. We commuted together, had lunch daily, not out of obligation but genuine desire. In fact, we did nearly everything together. We adorned a small Christmas tree, completed abandoned paintings, took up another ceramics class, and enrolled in ballroom dancing. To my surprise, a box of colored pens I found wasn't dry. One night while cuddling under a blanket and watching You've Got Mail, Sherry kissed me and conveyed the need to discuss something important. Tears welled in her eyes, causing a moment of panic as my heart skipped a beat. Without giving me a chance to respond, Sherry revealed, "You're going to be a daddy." I smiled, wiped away her tears, and in a playful manner mimicked Tom Hanks saying, Don't cry, Sellers. So I'm just obsessed with happy endings.
Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Cheating Tales Lab. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know, what part of the world are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. The metallic clang of surgical instruments echoed through Operating Room 3 at Metropolitan General Hospital. Dr. Abraham Wilkins stood over his patient, his gloved hands steady as they had been for the past 23 years of performing cardiothoracic surgeries. BP's dropping, Dr. Wilkins, the anesthesiologist announced. Abraham's eyes remained fixed on the exposed heart before him. Increase the dopamine drip. Let's get that pressure up. His movements were precise, calculated, a stark contrast to the chaos churning inside his mind. Dr. Lourdes Mansfield, assisting on the other side of the table, noticed the slight tension in his shoulders. She had worked alongside Abraham long enough to read the subtle signs others might miss. 3 hours later, as they scrubbed out, Lourdes broke the silence. That was close in there. We got it done, Abraham replied, methodically washing his hands. Your hands were steady as always, Abe, but your mind was somewhere else. Lourdes dried her hands, studying his reflection in the steel sink. Coffee. In the doctor's lounge, Abraham stared into his cup of black coffee, the events from last night's parent-teacher conference replaying in his mind. 24 hours earlier, the hallways of Westbrook Academy buzzed with activity as parents moved from classroom to classroom. Abraham adjusted his tie, having come straight from the hospital. Rebecca should have been there, but another yoga class had taken priority. Pete Wiggins's classroom smelled of chalk dust and teenage anxiety. The AP chemistry teacher's desk was cluttered with graded papers and half-empty coffee cups. Posters of the periodic table and molecular structures decorated the walls. Dr. Wilkins. Pete's handshake was firm, his smile too familiar. Caitlin's one of our brightest students. She definitely inherited those brains from somewhere. Thank you. Rebecca and I are proud of her dedication. Pete's expression shifted slightly at Rebecca's name. Ah yes, Mrs. Wilkins mentioned during book club that she's been helping Caitlin with her chemistry studies. Abraham's physician's intuition, honed by decades of reading subtle symptoms, picked up on something in Pete's tone. Book club? Oh yes. Pete shuffled some papers on his desk. The one that meets during my free periods on Thursdays. Your wife's quite the literature enthusiast. Rebecca had told him she attended yoga classes on Thursdays. Back in the present, Lourdes' voice cut through his thoughts. Earth to Abraham. Sorry. He set down his coffee. Just thinking about something Pete Wiggins said at parent-teacher conferences. The chemistry teacher Caitlin's always talking about? The same. Abraham leaned back, his surgical scrubs crinkling. Did you know Rebecca's apparently in a book club that meets during his free periods? I thought she did yoga on Thursdays. So did I. The silence between them spoke volumes. Clark Sheridan's office was exactly what you'd expect from a former FBI agent turned private investigator. Functional, organized, and completely unremarkable. The man himself matched his surroundings. Mid-50s, gray at the temples, wearing a suit that was practical rather than fashionable. Tell me everything, Clark said, his notebook open and pen poised. Abraham recounted the inconsistencies he'd noticed. Rebecca's changing schedules, the book club that conflicted with supposed yoga classes, Pete Wiggins's oddly intimate knowledge of his wife's activities. Clark made notes in precise, economical strokes. How long has your daughter been at Westbrook? Since freshman year. 3 years now. And when did the yoga classes start? Abraham frowned. Around the same time. Clark nodded, his expression neutral. I'll need a few days to establish surveillance and basic background checks. In the meantime, maintain your normal routine. Don't give any indication that you suspect anything. A week later, Clark's preliminary report lay on Abraham's desk at the hospital. Rebecca's yoga studio had no record of her membership. The book club she claimed to attend didn't exist, at least not officially. Dr. Wilkins? His office door opened, revealing Janet, one of the nurses. Your 3 o'clock valve replacement was canceled. The patient's blood work wasn't optimal. Abraham nodded, quickly sliding the report into his drawer. Thank you, Janet. Could you ask Dr. Mansfield to stop by when she has a moment? Later that afternoon, Lourdes perched on the edge of his office chair, reading Clark's findings. Jesus, Abe. There's more. He handed her a business card. Wendy Bartlett. The school librarian reached out to Clark yesterday. What did she say? She's been keeping records. Security footage, sign-in sheets, patterns of behavior. Apparently, Pete has a history of close relationships with students' mothers. Lourdes set down the report. Have you talked to Rebecca? Not yet. Clark's gathering more evidence. He says I need to be strategic about this. What about Caitlin? Abraham's face tightened. That's complicated. There are some medical markers in her blood work that never quite made sense. I've always dismissed it, but now, you think. I don't know what to think anymore. The next week passed in a blur of surgeries, surveillance updates, and sleepless nights. Clark's investigation produced a steady stream of evidence. Credit card statements showing purchases at times and places that contradicted Rebecca's stories, security footage from Westbrook Academy showing her car in the parking lot during Pete's free periods, and finally, the damning testimony from Wendy Bartlett. The school librarian sat across from Abraham in Clark's office, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I should have said something sooner.
But without proof.
Tell him what you saw last Thursday, Clark prompted. Wendy pulled out her phone, fingers trembling slightly as she pulled up a video. I stay late most days, cataloging new acquisitions. My office overlooks the science wing. The footage was grainy but clear enough. Rebecca, entering Pete's classroom after hours. The lights dimming. No one emerging for over an hour. There's more, Clark said quietly. Going back 3 years. Abraham's world tilted on its axis. 3 years. Since Caitlin started at Westbrook. The DNA test results arrived on a Tuesday. Abraham stared at the numbers and percentages that demolished 18 years of fatherhood. His office at Metropolitan General had never felt more sterile, more cold. The drive home that evening was a blur. He barely registered the familiar streets of their upscale neighborhood, the manicured lawns of Oakwood, or the Tudor-style home he had purchased when Caitlin was born. All he could see were the numbers on that report. Rebecca's car was in the driveway. Caitlin's debate practice wouldn't end for another hour. Or so he thought. He found Rebecca in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner with practiced precision. She looked up, smiling. You're home early. Rough day? You could say that. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. We need to talk, Rebecca. She set down the knife. What's wrong? Where were you last Thursday afternoon? Yoga class, you know that? Really? Because I have security footage of you entering Pete Wiggins's classroom at 3:45 p.m. The color drained from Rebecca's face. Abe. 3 years, Rebecca. 3 years of lies. It's not what you think. Don't. His hand slammed down on the counter, making the knife rattle. Don't you dare try to explain this away. I have everything. The false yoga classes, the non-existent book club, the money you've been funneling to him. You had me investigated? Her shock turned to anger. How dare you? How dare I? How dare you? 18 years of marriage, Rebecca. 18 years, and Caitlin isn't even mine. The sound of a backpack hitting the floor made them both turn. Caitlin stood in the doorway, her debate team uniform still pristine, her face a mask of horror. Practice ended early, she whispered. Caitlin, honey, Rebecca started. Get out, Abraham said quietly. What? Both Rebecca and Caitlin spoke simultaneously. Get out of my house, Rebecca.
Now.
Caitlin stepped between them. You can't kick her out. This is her home too. Caitlin, please. Rebecca reached for her daughter. No. Caitlin's voice rose. How dare you kick Mom out of the house, just over a tiny affair? Abraham's laugh was hollow. A tiny affair? With your teacher? The man who, as it turns out, is your biological father. The silence that followed was deafening. You're lying, Caitlin whispered. Abraham walked to his office, retrieved the DNA test results, and returned. He handed them to Caitlin with surgical precision. I'm a doctor, Caitlin.
These numbers don't lie.
Tears streamed down Caitlin's face as she read. This can't be true. Ask your mother. Rebecca's silence was answer enough. If you won't let her back in the house. Caitlin crumpled the papers. You're no longer my dad. I never was. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. Go pack your things, both of you. I want you out tonight. Abe, please. Rebecca tried one last time. We can talk about this. There's nothing to talk about. You can contact my lawyer tomorrow. He turned away, his voice clinical, detached. You know what? Go and live with your mom on the streets. Get out from here. The sound of their footsteps on the stairs, of drawers being yanked open and clothes being stuffed into bags, of muffled sobs and angry whispers, filled the house. Abraham stood in the kitchen, surrounded by the half-chopped vegetables and shattered remnants of his life. Later that night, after they had gone, Abraham sat in his dark office at home. The house echoed with emptiness. On his desk, family photos seemed to mock him, vacation snapshots, graduation ceremonies, holiday portraits. 18 years of memories, all built on lies. His phone buzzed. A text from Lourdes. Do you need company? He stared at the message for a long moment before responding. Not tonight. Surgery at 7 a.m. tomorrow. Setting the phone down, Abraham looked at the DNA test results one last time before filing them away. Tomorrow, he would call Barry Hahn and start the divorce proceedings. Tomorrow, he would begin dismantling the life he thought he had. But tonight, in the darkness of his office, Dr. Abraham Wilkins allowed himself to feel the full weight of betrayal. The steady hands that had saved countless lives trembled as he poured himself a drink, and for the first time in decades, he wept. Barry Hahn's corner office overlooked the city courthouse, a view he'd earned through 20 years of prosecuting the worst kinds of betrayal. The former prosecutor studied the DNA test results and surveillance photos spread across his mahogany desk. They're not wasting any time, Barry said, sliding a legal notice across to Abraham. Marcy King filed a divorce petition this morning. She's demanding immediate spousal support and exclusive use of the house. Abraham's fingers tightened on his coffee cup. The house I bought before we were married? Marcy's aggressive, but she's not subtle. Barry leaned back, his chair creaking. She's built her career bleeding men like you dry. Successful professionals who can't afford public scandal. I won't be blackmailed. Good. Barry pulled out a thick folder. Because our forensic accountant found something interesting in your joint accounts, the numbers told a story more sordid than even Abraham had imagined. Regular transfers to an offshore account, carefully disguised as charitable donations. Credit card statements showing expensive gifts. Hotel charges in neighboring cities. How much? Abraham asked. Close to $500,000 over the past 3 years. Barry highlighted several transactions. Most of it coincides with Pete Wiggins's known gambling debts. A knock interrupted them. Barry's secretary entered with another stack of documents. The subpoenas for Westbrook Academy's records just came through. Perfect. Barry turned to Abraham. Ready to go on offense? What's our strategy? We hit them with everything. Financial fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, alienation of affection. And once we expose Pete's gambling debts, Rebecca's lawyer will have to shift from offense to damage control. Abraham stared out at the courthouse. And Caitlin? Barry's expression softened slightly. She's 17, almost legally an adult. The courts will consider her preference, but given the circumstances, I don't want her money, or her time. Abraham stood. I just want the truth on record. Across town, in Marcy King's significantly more modern office, Rebecca sat with perfect posture, her designer handbag clutched like a shield. He's not playing fair, Rebecca insisted. Using private investigators, DNA tests, it's harassment. Marcy, a sharp-featured woman in her 50s, typed rapidly on her laptop. It's legal discovery, and he's within his rights. What concerns me are these financial transfers. I was helping a friend in need. A friend who happened to be having an affair with you? Marcy's fingers stopped moving. A friend who's the biological father of your daughter? Rebecca's composure cracked slightly. You don't understand. No, you don't understand. Marcy closed her laptop. Your husband's lawyer was a prosecutor. He's building a criminal case, not just a divorce filing. Those transfers weren't just betrayal. They were fraud. But the prenup. The prenup becomes void if criminal activity is proven. Marcy's voice hardened. Tell me everything about Pete's gambling.
Now.
Headmaster Wilson Daly's office at Westbrook Academy radiated old-world privilege. Oak paneling, leather chairs, and generations of alumni photographs created an atmosphere of unshakable tradition. But today, that tradition was trembling. This can't go public, Wilson insisted, his bow tie slightly askew. The reputation of the school? Wendy Bartlett's voice shook with anger. What about the reputation of every student whose mother Pete Wiggins targeted? Now, Ms. Bartlett, I have documentation going back 3 years. Wendy placed a USB drive on his desk. Security footage, email correspondence, complaints from other staff members that were lost in the system. Wilson's face reddened. Those files are school property, and I've already shared copies with Jamie Goldstein at the Herald. The name of the investigative reporter made Wilson collapse back into his chair. You didn't. She's running the story next week. Wendy stood.
Unless
you do the right thing. Fire Pete. Launch a formal investigation. Make this right. Before Wilson could respond, his phone buzzed. His secretary's voice trembled. Sir, there are police officers here with a warrant. And a news crew in the parking lot. Jamie Goldstein stood in front of the school's iconic brick facade, her red hair bright against the gathering storm clouds. Her cameraman adjusted the frame as she reviewed her notes. Westbrook Academy, the prestigious private school that has educated the city's elite for over a century, faces allegations of misconduct and cover-ups. Multiple sources within the school have provided evidence of inappropriate relationships between a teacher and students' mothers, along with financial irregularities involving hundreds of thousands of dollars. Parents gathered at the edges of the shot, phones recording, whispers spreading like wildfire. A police car pulled up, and 2 detectives emerged with boxes of seized documents. Inside, Pete Wiggins sat in the chemistry lab for the last time, watching through the window as his career imploded. His phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. They know about the money. All of it. His hands shook as he opened his desk drawer, pulling out a letter of resignation he'd prepared weeks ago. Too late now. The police would find the gambling debts, the loans, the threats from bookies. And Rebecca would tell them everything to save herself. The lab door opened. Detective Sarah Chin entered, her badge glinting. Mr. Wiggins? We need to talk about some financial transactions. In the library, Wendy Bartlett watched the scene unfold while copying more files. Other teachers began coming forward, the school counselor with notes from concerned students, the janitor with after-hours access logs, the business office staff with questioned expense reports. Ms. Bartlett? A junior reporter from the Herald approached. Can you tell us how long you've been documenting these incidents? Since the first red flag. Wendy looked at the growing crowd outside. Sometimes doing the right thing means burning everything down and starting over. The modest 2-bedroom apartment felt like a prison to Rebecca. No housekeeper, no garden service, no country club membership. Just beige walls and IKEA furniture. We can't live like this, she told Caitlin, who sat curled on the second-hand couch. Your father is destroying us. He's not my father. Caitlin's voice was bitter. You made sure of that. Don't take that tone with me. Rebecca paced the small living room. Everything I did was for us. And now he's trying to ruin everything. My reputation. My future. Your future. What about Pete? Caitlin's question hung in the air. Pete's. Rebecca's voice trailed off. Pete's dealing with his own problems. You mean his gambling debts? The ones you paid with Dad's, with Abraham's money? Rebecca spun to face her daughter. How did you? It's all over school. Caitlin stood, her face flushed. Everyone knows. Do you have any idea what it's like there now? My teacher, my biological father, was sleeping with students' mothers and stealing their money. It wasn't stealing.
It was.
Stop lying. Caitlin grabbed her phone. At least Abraham told me the truth, even when it hurt. Rebecca's expression hardened. Truth? You want truth? Fine. He's trying to destroy us, so we'll destroy him first. She pulled out a notebook. I've kept records of every patient he's lost, every complication in surgery. By the time I'm done, no one will trust him with a paper cut, let alone heart surgery. You're talking about ruining his career. Caitlin's voice shook. People could die if they're afraid to let him operate. He should have thought of that before he threw us out. Before he discovered your lies, you mean? Rebecca ignored her daughter's comment, already typing on her laptop. I've contacted every medical board in the state. Anonymous complaints about drinking before surgery, prescribing unnecessary medications, inappropriate behavior with nurses. None of that is true. It doesn't have to be true. Rebecca's smile was cold. It just has to be loud enough, constant enough, to create doubt.
Unless.
Unless what? Unless he agrees to reinstate us in his will. Give us what we deserve. At Metropolitan General, Abraham sat in Chief of Surgery Troy Calderon's office, surrounded by his colleagues. Dr. Lourdes Mansfield read through the latest batch of complaints. This is ridiculous, Lourdes said. Everyone knows you're the most careful surgeon on staff. You won't even take aspirin during call weeks. Troy Calderon, a commanding presence even seated, nodded. Our lawyers are already preparing responses. Every case Rebecca cited has complete documentation showing standard of care was not just met but exceeded. But the damage is already spreading. Abraham gestured to his significantly lighter surgery schedule. Patients are requesting other surgeons, not your regular patients. Lourdes set down the complaints, not the ones who know you. And the staff is behind you completely. Every nurse, every tech, every resident. They're all willing to sign statements supporting you. Salvatore Bernard, the hospital's lead counsel, entered with a stack of papers. We've got enough for a defamation suit. Multiple counts, provable damages, clear malicious intent. Do it, Abraham said quietly. No settlements, no deals. It'll be public, Troy warned. Messy. Everything's already public. Abraham stood. I've lost my wife, my daughter, and my home. I won't lose my integrity too. Later that night, Abraham sat in his office, reviewing surgical notes for the few cases that remained on his schedule. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It's Caitlin. Mom's lost it. She's going to destroy everything you've built unless you give her what she wants. I'm sorry. For everything. Abraham stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. Through his window, he could see the lights of the hospital chapel where he'd prayed the day Caitlin was born. The day he'd promised to always protect her, always love her. Some promises, he realized, were broken long before they were made. The next morning, Rebecca received a letter from Abraham's lawyers, not offering surrender or compromise, but serving notice of a defamation suit backed by the full power of Metropolitan General Hospital. As she read the detailed documentation dismantling each of her false complaints, her phone buzzed with news that would shatter what remained of her plans. Pete Wiggins had taken a deal with prosecutors. He would testify about everything, the affair, the money, the other mothers, in exchange for leniency. In his hospital office, Abraham prepared for his first surgery of the day, his hands steady as ever. Outside, life went on. Patients needed him, residents needed teaching, and the truth, slowly but surely, was emerging from the wreckage of lies. Dr. Lourdes Mansfield watched him scrub in, noting the straight line of his shoulders, the calm focus in his eyes. Ready? Always. Abraham stepped into the OR, leaving the chaos of his personal life outside those sterile doors. Here, in this room, there was only the work, the healing, the truth of what his hands could do. And for now, that was enough. The courthouse's oak-paneled courtroom sat silent as Judge Eleanor Martinez reviewed the final pieces of evidence. Barry Hahn stood confidently at the plaintiff's table, while Rebecca shifted uncomfortably beside Marcy King, her designer outfit now months out of style. Your Honor, Barry's voice carried easily through the chamber, we'd like to present evidence of additional financial fraud perpetrated by Mrs. Wilkins and Mr. Wiggins. The projector hummed to life, displaying spreadsheets and bank statements on the courtroom screen. These documents show a pattern of systematic fraud targeting wealthy parents at Westbrook Academy, Barry continued. Mrs. Wilkins didn't just assist Mr. Wiggins with his gambling debts. They worked together to scam other families. Marcy King rose to object, but Rebecca grabbed her arm. shaking her head. Her face had gone pale. Judge Martinez leaned forward. Mrs. Wilkins, do you wish to respond to these allegations? Rebecca's voice trembled. No, Your Honor. Very well. The judge removed her reading glasses. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, including proof of financial fraud, infidelity, and deliberate deception regarding paternity, I am granting Dr. Wilkins's petition for divorce. She paused, scanning the courtroom. Furthermore, given Mrs. Wilkins's criminal conduct, I am awarding Dr. Wilkins full ownership of all marital assets. The prenuptial agreement is void due to proven criminal activity. Rebecca slumped in her chair as Judge Martinez continued. Mrs. Wilkins, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution. Mr. Hahn has provided substantial evidence of wire fraud, theft by deception, and conspiracy. In the gallery, Detective Sarah Chan made notes while two uniformed officers moved closer to the courtroom doors. Your Honor, Marcy began. Your client perpetrated a years-long fraud that went far beyond a simple affair. Judge Martinez's voice hardened. She manipulated not only her husband, but an entire school community. The court cannot ignore such calculated deception. As Rebecca was led away in handcuffs, Abraham sat quietly, his expression unreadable. Barry gathered his papers, speaking softly to his client. Pete Wiggins took a plea deal this morning, Barry said. He's testifying against Rebecca and the gambling syndicate he was involved with. They're looking at serious time. Abraham nodded. And Caitlin? She's 18 now. Legally an adult. Barry hesitated. She's been trying to contact your office. I know. Abraham stood, straightening his tie. Some bridges can't be rebuilt. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered around Jamie Goldstein as she delivered her latest update. The divorce proceedings revealed a complex web of deception involving financial fraud at Westbrook Academy. Multiple families have come forward claiming they were targeted by Mr. Wiggins and Mrs. Wilkins. Sources say criminal indictments are pending. 6 months later, Abraham stood in Metropolitan General's teaching amphitheater, demonstrating a new valve replacement technique to a group of residents. His hands moved with practiced precision over the surgical simulator. The key is maintaining steady pressure while you secure the sutures, he explained. 1 millimeter's difference can mean the difference between success and failure. In the front row, Dr. Lourdes Mansfield watched with a slight smile. Besides her sat a woman she'd invited to observe, Dr. Letitia Roman, the hospital's new head of pediatric surgery. After the demonstration, Lourdes made the introduction. Abe, meet Dr. Roman. She's revolutionizing our pediatric cardiac program. Letitia's handshake was firm, her dark eyes direct. That was an impressive demonstration, Dr. Wilkins. Though I prefer working with smaller vessels in my tiny patients. Please call me Abraham. He noticed the plain gold band on her right hand, a widow's ring. I'd love to hear about your techniques. Maybe over coffee. Later, in the hospital cafeteria, their conversation flowed naturally from surgical procedures to personal histories. Military service took Jason from me 3 years ago, Letitia said, stirring her coffee. Left me with 2 boys and a lot of questions about what family really means. Abraham nodded. I thought I knew what family meant. 18 years of marriage taught me otherwise. I heard about the scandal. Letitia's voice was gentle but direct. Must have been hard, having your personal life splashed across the headlines. The betrayal was worse than the publicity. Abraham studied his cup. Finding out my daughter, that Caitlin wasn't mine. That everything I'd built was based on lies. Biology isn't everything. Letitia set down her cup. My boys are adopted. Jason and I couldn't have children, but they're ours in every way that matters. Their conversation continued through afternoon rounds, where Abraham watched Letitia with her young patients. Her compassion was evident, but so was her strength. She didn't sugarcoat difficult news, but she delivered it with genuine empathy. You're good with them, he commented as they left the pediatric ward. Children deserve honesty, she replied, even when it's hard. Maybe especially then. Over the following months, their professional collaboration grew into friendship. They consulted on complex cases, combining their expertise to save lives that might have been lost to either of them working alone. Dr. Mansfield watched their growing connection with satisfaction. During a particularly challenging surgery they performed together, she observed their seamless teamwork from the gallery. "They move like they can read each other's minds," a resident whispered. Lourdes smiled. "That's what happens when trust and respect come before everything else." 3 years passed. Abraham stood at the window of his new office at Metropolitan General, now decorated with photos of himself and Letitia at medical conferences, their blended family at graduation ceremonies, and most recently, their wedding day. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Troy Calderon entered, holding a letter. "Westbrook Academy's new board wants you as a trustee," Troy said. "They're implementing ethical oversight guidelines, want your input given." Everything that happened, Abraham took the letter. Interesting timing. Pete Wiggins gets out next month. And Rebecca? 2 more years, with restitution payments. Abraham set the letter down. Caitlin sent another letter last week. "Wanting to meet." Troy raised an eyebrow.
And
"Some chapters need to stay closed." Abraham's phone buzzed, a text from Letitia about their foundation's latest pediatric case. "Others are just beginning." Later that evening, Abraham and Letitia sat in their home office, reviewing applications for their children's medical foundation. Photos of her sons, now his stepsons, playing baseball decorated the walls alongside their medical degrees. Connor got accepted to medical school. Letitia mentioned, sorting through papers. "He wants to be a cardiac surgeon, like his stepdad." Abraham smiled. "As long as he knows it's his choice. No expectations, unlike some people we know." Her tone was gentle. "I got a letter from Westbrook Academy today," he said. "They want help preventing future scandals. Are you going to accept?" Abraham considered the question. "Maybe it's time. Use what happened to protect others." "You're not the same man who lost everything 3 years ago," Letitia observed. "You're stronger." "We're stronger," he corrected. "This foundation, our family, our work, it's all built on truth this time." The next morning, Abraham sat down to write his response to Westbrook Academy. Through his office window, he could see the hospital chapel where he'd once prayed over a daughter he thought was his. Now he said a different kind of prayer, one of gratitude for second chances and real love. As he finished the letter accepting the trustee position, his office phone rang. Another emergency case, another life to save. He grabbed his coat, heading for where Letitia would already be scrubbing in. They worked seamlessly together now, their personal and professional lives intertwined in ways he'd never imagined possible during those dark days 3 years ago. In the surgical lounge after the successful operation, Abraham found a letter in his locker, the latest from Caitlin. Unlike the others, this one would remain unopened. Some betrayals broke you, but others broke you free. He'd finally learned the difference. That evening, at home with Letitia and their sons, Abraham watched his new family share stories around the dinner table. Connor talked excitedly about medical school plans while his younger brother debated the merits of different residency programs. "You're smiling," Letitia observed quietly. "Just thinking about how loss can lead to finding something real," he replied. "Something true." Later, as they prepared for bed, Letitia asked, "Any regrets?" "About Caitlin?" Abraham considered the question carefully. "I regret that she lost her way, that Rebecca's lies cost her a father. But I can't regret moving forward. Sometimes healing means accepting that not every broken thing can be fixed. But some broken things come back stronger," Letitia added, squeezing his hand. Abraham nodded, thinking of their foundation's work, their blended family, their shared mission of healing. Everything they'd built together was based on choice, on truth, on mutual respect, not obligation or deception. "Some betrayals break you," he said, echoing words he'd repeat many times in the years to come. "And others break you free. The key is knowing the difference." Epilogue. 10 years later. The autumn wind scattered leaves across the grounds of Metropolitan General Hospital's new pediatric wing. The brass plaque beside the entrance read, "The Wilkins Roman Foundation Center for Children's Cardiac Care." Inside, Dr. Abraham Wilkins, now 58, stood before a gathered crowd at the center's 10th anniversary celebration. A decade ago, he began, his silver hair catching the light. This foundation was born from a belief that every broken heart deserves a chance to heal. whether it's physical or emotional. In the front row, Dr. Letitia Roman Wilkins squeezed her husband's hand. Their years together had only deepened the connection that began in those dark days after his divorce. Her sons, now accomplished doctors themselves, sat beside her. Connor having followed Abraham into cardiothoracic surgery, while Marcus had chosen pediatric oncology. Through this center, Abraham continued, we've treated over 10,000 children who couldn't afford specialized cardiac care. But today, I want to share a different kind of story about healing. The room fell silent as Abraham pulled out a worn envelope. 3 months ago, I received this letter from the Rockland Women's Correctional Facility. It was from my ex-wife, Rebecca. A murmur rippled through the audience. Even after a decade, the scandal remained part of the hospital's lore. The letter had arrived on a Tuesday morning. Dear Abraham, I'm writing this from my prison cell, where I've spent the last 7 years contemplating the magnitude of my betrayal. The doctors say my cancer is terminal, 3 months, maybe 4. Before I go, I need you to know the truth about everything. The money we stole from Westbrook parents didn't just go to Pete's gambling debts. We were running a sophisticated investment scam, targeting wealthy families through their children's education. Pete would identify vulnerable mothers during parent-teacher conferences, and I would befriend them at school functions. We destroyed lives, Abraham, not just yours. Pete committed suicide in his cell last year. He couldn't live with what we'd done, but I need to live long enough to make amends. I've provided the FBI with details about every scam, every victim. Some of the money might be recoverable. Caitlin visits me sometimes. She's a different person now, harder, more cynical. The trust fund you set up for her education remains untouched. She says she doesn't deserve it. Your kindness in providing for her education, despite everything, shames me more than my prison sentence. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I needed you to know that losing you, losing the life we had, wasn't worth any amount of money or excitement. The woman I was then seems like a stranger now. The nurses here know about your foundation. They say you and Letitia are doing amazing work. I'm glad you found happiness. It proves what I learned too late, that love built on truth lasts, while lies poison everything they touch. I'm sorry, Abraham, for everything. Rebecca, back in the present, Abraham folded the letter carefully. Rebecca passed away last month. In her final act, she helped recover millions in stolen funds, which her victims' families are finally receiving. In the audience, Wendy Bartlett, now Westbrook Academy's superintendent, dabbed at her eyes. The scandal had eventually led to her promotion and the school's complete reformation. Under her leadership, Westbrook had become a model of ethical education. But this story isn't about revenge or justice, Abraham continued. It's about the choices we make after betrayal. Do we let it break us, or do we let it break us free? Dr. Lourdes Mansfield, retired but still sharp as ever, smiled knowingly. She had watched Abraham rebuild his life, had introduced him to Letitia, had seen their love grow from shared pain into something beautiful. Through this foundation, we've chosen to transform pain into purpose. Every child we save, every family we help, is a testament to the power of starting over. The screen behind him displayed photos of their work. Children before and after surgery, families reunited, lives transformed. Among them was a recent picture that caught everyone's attention. A young woman in a white coat, her features hauntingly familiar. My daughter Caitlin, Abraham's voice softened, graduated from medical school last month. She's beginning her residency in psychiatry, specializing in helping children cope with family trauma. We're rebuilding, slowly. On honest ground this time, the revelation caused another stir. It was the first time he had publicly acknowledged renewed contact with his former daughter. She works at a clinic across town, he continued. Different hospital, different specialty. We see each other at medical conferences sometimes. Small steps, but real ones. Letitia stood, joining her husband at the podium. Life isn't about the families we're born into or the lies we're told, she added. It's about the truths we choose to live by. The ceremony continued, but the story wasn't finished. Later that evening, in their home office, Abraham and Letitia reviewed files of new cases while their grandchildren played in the next room. Connor's twins and Marcus's daughter filled the house with the kind of honest laughter that only children could provide. "Did you tell them about the other letter?" Letitia asked softly. Abraham nodded, pulling out another envelope. This one was from Pete Wiggins, written days before his death. "Dr. Wilkins, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. The guilt finally won. Prison gives you too much time to think about your sins. I want you to know that Caitlin was the only good thing that came from all our deceptions. She may be my biological daughter, but you were her real father in every way that mattered. The way you provided for her education, even after everything we did. It showed me what true fatherhood means. The money is hidden in offshore accounts. Rebecca knows the details. Make sure it gets back to the families we hurt. I'm sorry. Not that it matters now." A knock at the door interrupted them. Caitlin stood in the doorway, still in her hospital scrubs. At 27, she carried herself with a guarded professionalism that spoke of hard lessons learned young. "The children's group therapy program you sponsored," she said, "it's helping. One of my patients finally opened up today about her parents' divorce." Abraham nodded, careful to maintain the professional distance they'd established. "That's good to hear. I have some ideas for expanding the program," she continued. "If you and Letitia have time to discuss it, maybe over dinner next week?" The invitation hung in the air. Another small step toward healing. "We'd like that," Letitia answered warmly. After Caitlin left, Abraham stood at his office window, watching her walk to her car. The security lights caught the silver threads in his hair, reflecting in the glass. "You never told me what was in Rebecca's final letter," Letitia said quietly. Abraham touched the pocket where it rested. "She wrote it to Caitlin, actually. Asked me to deliver it when I thought the time was right. And is it?" He thought about their cautious reconciliation, the careful steps toward rebuilding trust. Soon, maybe, when she's ready to hear that her mother finally understood the difference between love and possession. In the next room, their grandchildren's laughter mixed with the sound of Connor teaching his twins about heart valves using a toy medical kit. The future of their foundation, their family's legacy of healing, played out in miniature. "You know what I learned?" Abraham said, turning to his wife. "Some betrayals do break you. They shatter everything you thought you knew about love and trust and family. But if you're lucky, if you're blessed, they break you free to build something stronger. Something real." Letitia took his hand, her wedding ring catching the light. "And the key is knowing the difference?" "No," he smiled, watching their blended, beautiful family through the door. "The key is being brave enough to try again. To believe that truth, even painful truth, is better than comfortable lies." In his desk drawer, one last unopened letter waited. Rebecca's final words to the daughter whose life had been built on lies. Someday, when the foundations of their rebuilt relationship were stronger, Abraham would share it with Caitlin. But for now, they would continue their careful dance of reconciliation, building trust one honest moment at a time. After all, they had learned the hardest way possible that real family isn't about biology or obligation. It's about choice, about forgiveness, about the courage to face truth and the wisdom to know that sometimes the deepest wounds can lead to the most profound healing. Outside, the autumn wind continued to scatter leaves across the hospital grounds, nature's reminder that endings are just beginnings in disguise. Inside the Wilkins Roman home, surrounded by the family they had chosen and the love they had built, Abraham and Letitia held onto their hard-won truth, that betrayal's greatest gift is the freedom to discover what loyalty really means. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.